call the meeting to order. As we begin our meeting today, please be aware that the meeting is being broadcast via the internet. So that means at any point, any of us, including some of you in the audience, could be visible to those who are watching online. That means be on your best behavior and turn your cell phones on stun, please, as well as your iPads and other computers. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce two new board members to you. They've attended some committee meetings already, but this is their first full board meeting. So this morning my script has age before beauty rather than ladies first. So Chris Huckabee of Fort Worth was appointed to the board in May by Governor Perry. Chris is the CEO of Huckabee Architecture, Engineering, and Program Management, a 46-year-old firm dedicated to K-12 educational design that he started as a 3-year-old, apparently. He received his Bachelor in Architecture from Texas Tech in 1991 and is a registered architect in Texas, Colorado, and New Mexico, Arkansas, and Georgia, 5 states. He also holds National Council of Architectural Registration Board certification. Please help me welcome Chris to our board. Chris, would you like to say a few words?
Happy to be here and have enjoyed working with you guys already and looking forward to the service.
Thank you. Good example of a few words. Next is Alice Schneider, our new student board member. Alice is from Austin and was appointed to a 1-year term by Governor Perry in June as our student representative. She is a student at Texas A&M University. I paused for the whoops and I only got one. And she is pursuing a Bachelor of Arts in Economics with a minor in Business Administration and English. Please help me welcome Alice to the board. Alice, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. So I just wanted to say thank you all for having me. I have been so overwhelmingly welcomed by the members of the board already, and they have been very, willing to hear my student input, and so I've been very thankful for that.
Well, you also recently attended or invited to attend a U.S. Department of Education meeting through the State Higher Education Executive Officers Organization to meet with Secretary Arne Duncan. And you were one of 15 students from across the U.S. Who were invited to discuss higher education issues with the Secretary. So would you like to give us just a brief report on that?
Sure. So I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to participate in the Student Voices program, as Chairman Heldenfels remarked upon. And while I had originally planned on meeting with the Secretary of Education in D.C., my flight was canceled, and so the Department of Education was very, very understanding and gave me a call-in number, so I was able to participate in the discussion. The main topic of discussion was college affordability, of course, and with specific regards to the recent increase in student loans, federal student loans. Most notably, the Secretary called upon my generation to look for innovative ways to make college more affordable and accessible for all. He also spoke up about the recent examples of Oregon, which has moved to tuition based on their salary of the graduate students, and Indiana, which has moved towards outcomes-based funding. So we discussed about how to involve students in this debate and how to get students to be energized upon this topic, which I think is very important and something I will definitely look into. So,
thank you, Alice. Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman, I simply wanted to say that I received an email about the meeting that Secretary Duncan had with the students, and the email indicated that the meeting was very successful, that the Secretary was very pleased by the responses from the students and their thoughtful remarks on the various issues, and he was extremely pleased with the meeting, and Alice was a significant participant in it. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to jump briefly ahead to item 1C and come back to B. He is not with us this morning, but we have a new university president. Ron Brown took the position 2 weeks ago as president of UNT Dallas. And we and my fellow board members had a chance to meet Ron last night at a function with the chancellors and presidents, so appreciate his new service to Texas. Now I'll turn back to item 1B for Vice Chairman Harold Hahn.
Well, Fred, this is all about you.
This was dangerous.
Before I read this resolution, I just want to tell you, your leadership and character have influenced me more than you could ever know. You've been not only a friend and a mentor, but somebody that I really look up to. And then I'm going to read this, okay, because it's more flowery than what I said. Whereas Fred W. Heldenfels IV was appointed to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board by Governor Rick Perry in July 2006, and in May 2010 was appointed chair of the board. And whereas during his 7 years of distinguished service, Mr. Heldenfels has always placed the needs and aspirations of Texas students at the forefront of all efforts to reform higher education. And whereas Mr. Heldenfels' tireless leadership was instrumental in giving a rising generation of high school students the tools and the confidence that they could enter and complete higher education with enrollments and degrees exceeding target goals under his chairmanship. And whereas Mr. Heldenfels has insisted on a culture of accountability, efficiency, and continuous improvement to ensure that the coordinating board and institutions of higher education are held to the highest standards as stewards of taxpayer resources and student tuition. Whereas Mr. Heldenfels instituted the concept of lean principles in the administration and operations of the coordinating board, and it has encouraged this practice of efficiency at institutions of higher education. And whereas Mr. Heldenfels strongly championed the need to help more Texas workers earn post-secondary credentials, both to enhance their own career prospects and to secure the continued economic prosperity of our state. And whereas Mr. Heldenfels has helped design and advance numerous initiatives regarding these goals, including the Texas College and Career Readiness Standards, the Accelerated Plan for Closing the Gaps by 2015, the Report on Higher Education Cost Efficiencies, and the Higher Education Almanac, incorporating student success measures into funding for community colleges and the Texas State Technical Colleges, launching the Generation Texas campaign to create a college and workforce-ready culture in every school, launching Compare College Texas, and laying the foundation for the next long-term strategic plan for Texas higher education. And whereas Mr. Heldenfels has earned the deep admiration and respect of his colleagues, coordinating board staff, and institutions of higher education due to his dedication, collegiality, enthusiasm, professionalism, and hard work. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board on this 25th day of July 2013 express our deepest appreciation to Fred W. Heldenfels IV for his distinguished service as an influential member of this board and his unwavering dedication to higher education for all the people in Texas. And be it further resolved that the resolution be included in the minutes and that a copy of the resolution signed by the members of the board be presented to Mr. Heldenfels in recognition of the high esteem in which he is held. Nothing could be truer than that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
No, you have to open it.
I have to open it? I should have asked for the abridged version of the resolution. What's really impressive is he wrote that on the back of a cocktail napkin last night. Okay, it's too heavy to be a tie. It's like Christmas, Fred. You can just.
What?
You know, you ask an Aggie to do something complex on the spur of the moment. All right. There we go. Whoop. This is coming out in pieces. Oh, I get to take a gavel with me. Thank you. Thank you. I'll use this today. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And it's been my honor and my privilege to serve with my fellow board members and the commissioner with a staff that, you know, I'll match against any staff, not only in Texas, but any state agency anywhere. The hard work and dedication is always overwhelmed me with the midnight emails and the hours and hours. And it's not all because of the legislature. They work that way, you know, year-round, every year. And, of course, with those of you who are our stakeholders, the leaders of our institutions, it has certainly been my privilege to work in a field in which we all share the same passion to create an opportunity for the young people of Texas and many of our adults to be more of who they were created to be through post-secondary education. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Now, on to more important matters and more distinguished guests. It's an honor to have with us today Senator Seliger, Chairman of the Senate Higher Education Committee. Chairman Seliger was first elected to the Texas Senate in 2004 to represent Senate District 31, which spans 37 counties from the Panhandle to the Permian Basin and includes Amarillo, Midland, Odessa, and Big Spring. Born in Amarillo and raised in Borger, Chairman Seliger is a graduate of the Borger Public Schools and Dartmouth College. He spent 35 years in the steel industry, which is almost as good as the concrete industry. And prior to his election to the Senate, Chairman Seliger served 4 terms as mayor of Amarillo and a member of the Amarillo City Commission and Amarillo City Civil Service Commission. Chairman Seliger, thank you for taking time out of what has been a busier summer schedule than anyone would have anticipated. I know you have a Senate Finance Committee hearing just a little bit later this morning, so we welcome your remarks and look forward to visiting with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was a real honor to sit here today and listen to Mr. Hahn's comments about you, because your service to the state of Texas really has been distinguished. And people outside of the orbit of this organization don't realize the sacrifices that you make to the state of Texas simply to make things better, realizing that what you do has everything to do with the future of the state of Texas and the workforce that will be employed in the state of Texas, and that makes it a very important function. When I was named chairman of the Committee for Higher Education, I had not served on this committee, and it was my first chairmanship of the standing committee. And it has been a real education, and I've learned an awful lot from the institutions in the state of Texas and for this board, and appreciate the work that you do. I view higher education in the state of Texas as a system, not individual institutions spread around a large state, but as a system, just as we have one populace and one workforce. And that is where the coordinating board, I think, provides an essential service to sort of see that those efforts coalesce, given all the differences and the uniqueness around so many of our institutions. Really, the fundamental mission is the same, and it is a unified one. I believe, Mr. Chairman, that you and Commissioner Paredes will testify to the fact that if there are issues that need to be discussed, there is really no problem that getting an appointment in my office, because I want to know and need to know what you have to say. I may have been one of the greatest educational challenges of Commissioner Paredes' life, but since he's had a lot of experience and practice, he was up to the task. And the coordinating board plays an essential role in higher education in the state. Do we always agree on everything that goes on in the process and in policy? No, we don't. But we must always discuss it. because the issues are always important and the results are important. The results are nothing less than the future of the young people, some of them not so young, in Texas colleges and universities. The biggest part of any legislative session, and I know this one appears endless, but it really isn't, was funding. That's the most important thing the legislature does, and people say if we would come to town, take 2 days, pass a budget, and leave, everyone would be better off. But that really wouldn't be very much fun, because if you get to sit in the chamber and get to watch somebody chained to the rail around the chamber is something that really you don't want to miss. We increased funding in higher education by about $522 million. In a state and in a time where fiscal conservatism is such a value and a value that I particularly agree with, there are certain realities about public education and every other process. And that is, with inflation and growth, there are additional costs. And we have to be realistic about that, and I think we are. One of the things that we find comes as no surprise. It's never enough money. It is never enough. We realize that, but I hope people keep in mind also that each of us in the Texas Senate represents about 815,000 people, all of whom are convinced that they are overtaxed now. And so we have to sort of integrate all those impulses. We increased funding for Texas grants by $135 million, money very, very well spent. And when we talk about increasing tuition and things like that, this is our answer to it, is financial aid. The administration of this scholarship and all the other scholarships that the coordinating board supervises is essential, because every institution has different needs and different students and things like that. I had Senate Bill 497, which capped the associate's degrees at the SACS requirements. This was done with the guidance of and at the behest of the coordinating board, simply because it is a good idea. And when these come along, this is why, as long as there have been institutions of higher learning, as long as there's been a coordinating board, issues like this still come up in 2013 and need to be addressed. And one of the things, this is for any member, any committee member, and any chair, the opportunity to carry and support meaningful legislation that really does make a difference and do something is sort of the high point for a lot of us. Senate Bill 498 ensured transfer students receive their associate's degrees even though they've gone to the university. It's a great thing to do, and it's a great idea, and it's great for those young people. There's not much cost involved, and it's a good thing to do. It was with the help of the coordinating board that we modified the Be On Time loan program, that we're going to get more mileage of it and hopefully more effect, because it's an important thing to do with a growing body of students and the attendance in college increasing, to see to it that if those seats are going to be available, it's not just raw numbers of seats, it is moving young people along so those seats become vacant. Two of the things that I am most interested in is dual credit and early college high school. Two programs which I think are absolute unqualified successes at very low cost. And one of the things that I don't know that a lot of people have thought about this, about dual credit, is when a young person graduates from high school with 20 to 30 credits, it obviates that fifth-year victory lap that students really like to take because they like being on college campus. But it saves their families in the States a tremendous amount of money. Economically, it's one of the best things that we do. I got to spend some time in early college high school in Midland. And it was 8 or 9 students, all but one minority, and all of them that in the 9th grade were young people at risk. And today, all 8 of them are going to college, and they have the loftiest of goals. A couple of them want to go into engineering at Texas Tech. One wants to go to college and go into the Navy. You'll be glad to know that one or two of them would like to go to A&M and various technical endeavors. They're going to college. All but one of them will be the first member of their family to go to college. And what we do there is create a culture that values higher education and training. And it costs the taxpayers absolutely nothing. Midland College and Midland Independent School District paid for it, and it is one of the best investments I believe that they will make. To that end, I tried to get into the General Appropriations Bill a nominal amount of money. It was about $21 million to go into early college high school, and that's my goal for the next session, to invest money into something that is such a proven success. It's really not very difficult conceptually, a little more difficult to get it appropriated, but it's a really, really good idea, and I hope that we'll see more of that, and I hope it's something that you all address going forward. When it comes to outcomes-based funding, there's been a lot of discussion, and we have put together a model. And with the participation of the commissioner, when we talk about the outcome-based funding schemes in community colleges and at the TSTC campuses. And one of the best things about that is it came from the institutions themselves. They came in and proposed that whole thing. It didn't come out of the legislature. And it was feasible, and we could do it within the budget allocated. And I think that's going to set down our model. It gets a little bit more complicated, I think, in a university setting, because the expectations in some cases are different. Some institutions that have a particularly high concentration of first-generation students, or students who also have to work while they're going to school, I think maybe the expectations ought to be tailored to that capability, as opposed to a lot of students that are full-time and their parents are going to pay tuition, and they come from a family where higher education is a priority. Our goal is to make that higher education a priority. Going forward, I look forward to working with all of you and all of the members. I hope that you won't feel that coming to the Capitol is some sort of special sort of outing or something like that, that any time that I or members of the committee can sit down and talk about the issues that are important to you, I look forward to that. Because that discussion is important to the future of the state of Texas. We all want a well-educated and well-trained workforce. We realize the relative value, I think, or the comparative value, university education and community colleges. I represent a district, it's 6 or 7 community college districts that have satellite schools and things like that. And it provides a college education if you're in some place like Moore County or Ochiltree County, and you have to work, but would like to go to school, improve yourself, improve your community. The best way to do that is the community college. The only way, in some respects, is a community college. And the difference that it's making is so profound that in places like Hereford, they have done a bond issue, and they're going to raise a lot of money to build a freestanding campus. That's the value they see in that community, as they do in communities all over. We're going to see so many changes. A brand new university in the Valley that's going to be the cornerstone of a new medical school. And all that sounds really good, and medical schools are really sexy, but they're designed to fill a need in the state of Texas. And to the degree that they fill that need is going to be a big subject that you will deal with going forward. We're going to put a lot more money into GME and things like that. One of the things I hope that we can do in the interim is look at all the different things we're doing in GME, when there's money coming from here and here, and see to it that we have sort of a unified vision of what that ought to be. We have an awful lot of different funds that I hope that we and you will analyze in the interim. This fund and this institutional enhancement and this institutional enhancement, to what degree are they duplicative? To what degree do they create winners and losers? I happen to be a fan of formula funding because it raises all boats. And all of those boats deserve to be raised, from our flagship universities, emerging flagship universities, and the much, much smaller universities that do incredible things, both in their communities and in the Texas workforce. And I hope we'll have a chance to discuss that. But I want to express my great appreciation to you, Mr. Chairman, and the Commissioner and all the members of the board for working with our committee and with me as we go forward, which is the essential theme. Today has been settled. Everything that's good in universities had been decided a long time ago. What we do today that determines what goes into those universities and what comes out of those colleges and universities a generation from now. And I very much appreciate your efforts to that end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your remarks, and I do want to underscore what a great job not only you but your staff, Mark Kavanaugh, who's with you here today, did throughout the session. of not only pursuing the issues in the discussion, but you always had an open door policy for the commissioner and myself and our members, and that was appreciated. Raymund got to brief you on a pretty frequent basis, and I think y'all are continuing a regular breakfast date for all I know, but we appreciate your accessibility as well as your leadership. And I want to give the members a chance, if they have some questions, for the chairman to have a little dialogue here. Mr. Vice Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, you know, due in no small part, your leadership brought about some significant changes in the last legislature, not the least of which was increased funding in the form of grants. You just indicated you were a strong proponent of formula funding. One of our, I think, significant legislative focuses was outcomes-based funding. And we accomplished that with community colleges and the technical college. How do you feel about outcomes-based funding for the university system?
I'm very open-minded to it, and I think that any enterprise, particularly that uses taxpayer money, ought to be expected to perform at a certain level, perform certain tasks, certain outcomes. What they are and how you get there is the question. We have some universities, their first to second year retention is very, very high, and in some of them it's a lot lower. Is that second example somehow unsuccessful or failing? I would argue that it's not in a lot of cases. And so it depends upon how we apply the metric. I have no problem with outcomes-based funding. I think we're going to have to develop the idea so we have a system that's really fair to all. So we don't consider, say, Texas A&M a glowing success, and it is, and somebody with some of the lesser outcomes and a lower graduation rate over 6 years or something, that it is either failing or is qualitatively performing not as well, because it may not be. Different schools do different things. At the same time, I could argue that if you look at A&M Galveston and look at the percentage of the graduating class there that will have a job in 6 months, A&M in Texas may look like abject failures compared to that. Are they? I suggest not. My son just graduated from the University of Texas, and he doesn't have a job yet, and I would hate for that to reflect on the university. But it's a question of context, Mr. Hahn, and we're going to develop it. I think that the first thing that I did when I was named chairman and outcomes-based funding was a topic of discussion. And there are certain areas of it with which I patently disagree. When we talk about the relative value of some programs in which there is no balance sheet and things like that, I patently, profoundly disagree. At the same time, I think that we will get there with the help and guidance of this board, and I think it's important because we need to go back and show people what they're investing in, because they invest a lot in higher education.
Thank you.
Members, other questions?
One of the biggest, I think one of the biggest things that we really attempt to do on this board, and I know you all do too, is controlling cost. And what can we do? I mean, how can this board assist the legislature in terms of just trying to control the costs, particularly to middle-class working people that just are having a difficult time affording? I appreciate your comments concerning community colleges. I think you've got a tremendous appreciation for the worth and value that they play in higher education in Texas, and we continually say here at this board that they're the low-cost option for so many students. So that's the reason they play such a great role. But would you give us some ideas of perhaps what you would think that maybe we could do, or how we could work together to collaboratively get a hold of some of these costs that just seem to be, you know, with the number of students that are coming out with loans and student loans and debts and things like that, it just seems to be an awful way for them to begin their lives. So in my mind, it was something I wasn't faced with when I finished many years ago. Thank you.
I was at some sort of meeting in the last year, and a lady who's I think it was a daughter attended one of the flagship universities, and said, "What can you do to bring the tuition down for my son?" And I said, "Your son had a lot of options, and if X university was too expensive, there is, and I say proudly, there's West Texas A&M, University of Texas Permian Basin, Tarleton, that are substantially less. But you weren't really shopping for price, were you? There was something specifically they wanted." I would argue that the 75% of the young people that start higher education, community colleges in Texas, are getting the best bargain probably in education anywhere in the country. That exists. We just have to what is it we're going to look for, and what do we expect? I think the answer is in a dialogue between the coordinating board and the universities and university systems, because what you all do best is ask, what are you doing and why? And what does it cost? What does it produce? And things like that. We're going to do the $10,000 education, which is a little bit illusory if you think about it, because 3 years from now that's an $11,000 education, so that was sort of pointless, wasn't it? The point is a cost at which people can afford. At the same time, and there was one whoop, so two of you went to A&M. Does anybody think that inflation alone is not greatly going to increase the cost of operation in College Station next year and the next year and next year, and no one can do anything about that? And so really it's very much a process. Is there a prescription to lower costs? There's a lot of them. Close down a lot of buildings and stuff like that, but is that really what we want to do? And so it's an ongoing deal. Do I have a prescription on how we're going to lower costs, essentially? I would argue that we have a price point for almost everybody, and then the answer there is financial aid. Modifying the cost of attending college with financial aid. And I think everybody is dedicated to it, but you have to view that in the context that 40% of our budget is public education, 30% is health care, and now we talk about higher education, transportation, criminal justice, and all those other things.
Senator, looking forward, what do you anticipate in the interim? Of course, first we have to get to the interim, which we haven't done yet, but what do you anticipate might be some of the interim charges or priorities that your committee is tasked with on higher education?
One of the things that I'm interested in is alignment. We have too many kids getting into college and university, and they're not prepared to do college work. And they come out of good schools. They come out of good school systems. They're going to good universities, but they're not quite as aligned. The commissioner and I talked, I think, just about a week ago about teacher education, more interaction between people who teach in education primarily, but not exclusively, in the universities and time that they spent with people in secondary education. We're always going to have a little bit of remedial education. You're going to have a kid whose focus is on the arts that come out of high school with good grades and have a requirement to take some math and science, and it's a challenge, and that's fine. We want those kids to go to university, but it doesn't have to be as widespread as it is, and I think you and the commissioner will say, no, it doesn't. It's that alignment, I think, that is very, very important. So when a young person gets into college, they're ready to do college work at all levels. We had some controversy, and that will save a lot of money. I don't know that it was controversy about Common Course numbering, which I think is a nice idea. It is not going to be as broadly implemented as some people think it is. I think those are going to largely be local compacts, which will work very, very well. But to ensure that English 101 in a community college is exactly the same as English 101 at A&M Kingsville, really, can we guarantee that? And what's going to be the driver? And we're going to have challenges like that going forward. I think those are going to be some of the big issues. I'm sure you've discussed some others that I can't put my finger on right now. There's going to be a lot of them. I think as we see new internet-based educational challenges. I think that's going to be a lot of it because to a degree I think that's going to change the face of education. We're seeing distance learning now make an enormous amount of difference in institutions all over the place. You can sit in a community college in Perryton and take a class in Houston or at Indiana University or things like that, and it is a real-time interactive, not a lot different than being in a very large classroom somewhere else. That's going to be huge. But the internet doesn't mean everything to all pursuits. For somebody with what was a minor in a foreign language, I'm singularly unimpressed with internet-based foreign language education. Just am. It is so interactive by its very nature that anything that lessens the interaction in foreign language, with the exception possibly of literature, is not the best that you can do. I think those are going to be some of the big issues, and you probably have a better idea of a lot of others.
We appreciate your input and your feedback on that. I think we're, certainly some of those things will be coming from leadership as soon as you do get to the interim.
Mr. Chairman, I have some comments and questions.
Durga?
Yes, sir. Senator, I'm concerned about a cost of education and healthcare cost. I talked to you yesterday about it a little bit. And what do you think about online education and distance education? I feel that 20 to 30% of the education and maybe bigger percentage can be done online, where we don't have to have the classrooms and we don't have to spend money on the faculty and so on. Like you were talking about English 101, we can make it standard, some of these classes, where somebody who has done a good job, Texas A&M or UT or University of Houston, we can take their online class and have everybody offers same class online and have interactive question and answers. That can lower cost of education. And I want to know what your feeling is on online and distance education. And also healthcare cost keeps on increasing. I believe that we need to encourage nursing programs in the state of Texas, bachelor's, master's, and DNP, doctorate in nursing, and 60 to 80% of the health care can be taken care by nurses. And we have done a good job of approving several DNP programs. I was wondering what your views are in that area. That will be a good way to lower healthcare cost. And also, I think we should introduce yoga in the elementary school, middle schools, and high schools of Texas, where Texas can be leader in promoting health and reducing healthcare cost. I was wondering, what are your views on these 2-3 things?
You may have to refresh my memory what they were. I'm a big fan of online learning because I participated in one of the pioneering programs in the 70s, and I think it does an awful lot. We should not overestimate what it does, and we're seeing a clear dichotomy in traditional education and online because we see some rather well-developed models. And I think we ought to watch them very, very carefully, and you ought to watch them very, very carefully, because the marketplace is going to determine just how effective they are. And we're going to see this when somebody has a degree from a conventional university, like UT Tyler, and somebody has an online degree from one of the vendors. The workforce is going to tell us what the relative value there are sitting at your table, a number of people who are employers who make those decisions about your workforce today. You tell us what it means. Take an engineering graduate from UT and somebody whose degree is largely online. Who are you going to hire? That determines it. I have some cynical views about healthcare education, not healthcare education, but about healthcare and the cost of healthcare. The things you talk about, increased number of nurses and things like that, quite frankly, no, I don't think. The proliferation is going to bring down the cost of healthcare because it's largely derived from procedures done in big hospitals that charge an awful lot and a lot more than their cost. I think that nothing about having more nurses is going to do anything with the myth of cost shifting, and I'm cynical in that respect. When you talk about things that are directed toward wellness, be they yoga and other things, that is probably going to do more to contain healthcare costs because it means that people will not utilize healthcare, which is obviously the driver. I think there's some real potential there. In the elementary school, I think there are going to be some challenges. I had, like many of you, had children go through healthcare. They were both boys. We had a challenge with hand washing, much less yoga. We'll get there. There is no bad solution. That we ought to think about things like that. Right now it seems very, very novel, but think about this. We had a big initiative 2 or 3 sessions ago to ensure that every child got some recreation during the day in the form of physical education. Nothing to it. It's something that we've already done classically. Yoga is a little bit of a philosophical departure, but does that mean that it's not a good idea? No, I think we'll start somewhere with a pilot program and see what it does. With young people, we're not going to see a big impact for a long time on healthcare costs because the younger people tend to be not big consumers of healthcare. But over time, I think it may make a big difference. Like I say, it was kind of a novel idea when you first brought it up and I heard it. I'm interested in anything that would bring down costs.
My son-in-law went to Yale for residency program. Every Friday morning for half an hour, all the residents, all these doctors did half an hour of yoga every Friday morning. And he tells me that everybody loved it. It was good for everybody, good to calm down their mind because they work long hours. So maybe it should be looked at, and maybe there should be some, like you said, pilot program studies. Also, I think we should do some kind of pilot program studies on nursing and see how much nursing can lower our healthcare cost. Maybe that will tell us, will it really lower cost, or like you say, that it don't lower cost. Thank you very much, sir.
And we've done some things about advanced practice nurses and things like that. Our concern there was less the cost of healthcare than simple availability of healthcare in medically underserved areas. Having gone to Dartmouth, I sympathize with anybody who had to spend much time in New Haven, but everyone's got their cross to bear. But I think there's a good deal to it. And what we have found very often when a lot of large corporations like Microsoft encourage and provide facilities for their employees, they find it far more productive that if they get some recreation during the day and that they follow a healthier lifestyle and encourage it and pay for it, I think that's a good thing. You'll find that in a lot of universities when you simply look at dining halls and what they offer people, gluten-free diets and low-cal diets, a lot of fiber and things like that. They've explored the beer-free diet in a lot of college campuses, and it's not catching on.
Chairman, thank you very much for your time. I think if there's any press here, I can already see what the headlines will be. You know, yoga classes for all to solve health care. But we really appreciate your spending time with us both last night and this morning and your remarks. And in particular, I want to thank you again for your leadership because this was a very successful session for higher education. You hit a lot of the key highlights from student financial aid funding being increased to doing some things that were good ideas to improve the velocity with which our students complete their degrees, to recognizing the need for increasing investment in graduate medical education. And we got a lot of positive things done this session, and in no small part due to your tireless effort and leadership. So thank you, and thank you for being here with us this morning.
Thanks. I think it was a successful session, and due no small part to your energies and those of the commissioner and your entire board. I look forward to the opportunity of working with you, and I appreciate you asking me to be here today.
Our pleasure. Thank you, sir. Before we move on with our agenda, there is one last announcement I'd like to make, and that is regarding our annual Texas Higher Education Leadership Conference, which will be held in Austin on November 21st and 22nd at the Doubletree Hotel on North I-35. This year's theme will be Closing the Gaps by 2015 and Beyond. As in past years, the conference will bring together regents, trustees, chancellors, presidents, and other education leaders to discuss critical higher education issues. This later in the fall conference date will allow newly elected trustees to attend subsequent to the November 5th elections. In response to faculty recommendations, the special conference for faculty and staff members that has been associated with this conference the past 2 years will now be held during the summer of 2014 to provide better timing for faculty and staff. As I said, the Leadership Conference will focus on the next Texas higher education plan, including the key metrics that are being considered to measure our state's progress toward making Texas an international leader in student success and excellence by 2030. The annual State of Higher Education Luncheon and annual Texas Higher Ed Star Awards ceremony will also be held on November 22nd. The lunch will feature our 2012 Star Award finalist and the State of Higher Education address by Commissioner Raymund Paredes. Star Award winners will be announced at this luncheon. So please look for a hold the date announcement and future information coming to an email inbox near you soon. All right, with that, we will return to our agenda. The second agenda item is approval of the minutes from our January board meeting. Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
So moved.
Oh, good. Yep. Let me correct my script. April board meeting.
So moved.
We have a motion from Vice Chairman and a second from Durga. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Next is the consent calendar for the entire meeting. The consent calendar includes non-controversial items we think can be approved without comment or discussion. This allows us to save time for other items that need more of our attention. Of course, any board member can request that an item either be removed or added to the consent calendar to give us the opportunity to either discuss it or not. At this time, does any member want to remove an item from the or items from the consent calendar? Does any board member want to add any items to the consent calendar? If not, do I hear a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Have a motion from Bobby, second from Chris. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We will now move on to agenda item 4, our major policy discussion. Former state demographer Steve Murdoch played a significant role. He was just sitting out there in the front. Oh, there.
Right there.
Thought you'd disappeared on us. Played a significant role in the development of the state's higher education plan, Closing the Gaps by 2015. As the plan nears its formal end, Dr. Murdoch will offer insights for the development of a new 15-year plan and the continuing challenges for Texas higher education. Dr. Murdoch will present his most recent analysis with respect to where and how populations have changed in Texas. Welcome, Dr. Murdoch. It's great to have you back.
Turn your mic on.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I'll try to be as brief as I can, but remember that I am a demographer, and demographers believe they have a divine calling. And we think that's the case because there's a book of Numbers in the Bible, and it's all about censuses. So let's proceed. I want to look first at some basic demographic change, and then talk about the implications of this for education, looking at what we can be or not be depending on what we do. So let's start off with a very clear look at Texas, and this is one of those slides that I refer to as my as you can plainly see slides. I have a colleague who for years has said, what I like about you, Murdoch, is you take about 200 numbers, put them on a slide, and put them in front of a bunch of people, and you say, as you can plainly see. But really the main thing here is to note that Texas has always had substantial population growth. In every decade since Texas first allowed the U.S. to join it, we have grown more rapidly than the country as a whole. And so if you compare those percentage changes here for the crowd and those in front of you, you see that we have had more rapid population growth. In the last decennial period, from 2000 to 2010, we had by far the largest numerical increase, about 4.3 million people, greater than California, that is about 12 million larger than we are. And if you looked at us in percentage terms, we were the 5th fastest growing in percentage terms in that decade, and you see that most of the states, or all of the states, that had a larger percentage increase were substantially smaller than we are. Now, if you look at the most recent period of time, and the most recent data that we have are estimates through 2012, you can see that we led the country in terms of growth again. We increased our population, as you can see, on a numerical basis, or on an annualized basis, about 800,000 persons a year. California was second with about 700,000. But dramatic growth, and if you looked at it in percentage terms, we were second in percentage terms. Now, I do want to point out that the state with the largest percentage increase was my home state of North Dakota. And I have to say that because I never thought I would live long enough to see North Dakota be at the head of anything on population. But do note as well that they did their increase of 3.6% with an increase of 24,000 people. Ours was with 812,000. So this is a case where percentages can be somewhat deceiving. Our growth has been in Texas for decades now and continues to be really concentrated in 4 parts of the state. The Dallas-Fort Worth, Arlington area, as you see up here on this particular slide, the Houston, Sugar Land, Baytown area, really the Austin to San Antonio area, and then down in the valley in McAllen, Edinburgh, Mission. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't growth in other parts of Texas, but if you look at this particular chart and you look at the right-hand most column, that is the percent of growth that came from each, or the percentage change for each of those areas. And it turns out if you add those first 5 areas, you account for about 85+% of all the growth that Texas had from 2000 to 2010. We're a state that continues to have disparity in growth, and I think it's sometimes we get all wrapped up in the fast-growing areas and forget that there are some areas indicated in red on this map that didn't grow. They continued to decline in the 2000 to 2010 decade. And the interesting thing is there were 79 from 2000 to 2010 that declined, and although we've had this phenomenal growth in the last couple of years, as of 2012, there were 96 counties in Texas that were having population decline. I like to bring that up because I think it's important to not see Texas as monolithic in terms of its patterns. So there's areas that are struggling for growth. There are areas that are having difficulty managing growth. Well, I argue the most important thing impacting Texas, and in fact I'll say for the country as a whole, is the change in the racial and ethnic composition of Texas and the country. And I'm going to show you a bunch of slides like this, so I'll kind of lead you through here looking at one. We're going to look at 3 or 4 different things, but I want to point out that you don't have to look at everything on these slides. For example, we're going to look at this column here, okay, which is the percent change from 2000 to 2010 for each of those racial and ethnic groups. For example, for non-Hispanic whites in Texas, that growth rate was 4.2%. The next column, percent of total change, is the percent of change accounted for by that population group. So 10.8%, about 11% of net growth in Texas was due to non-Hispanic whites. Or another way to say that is 89% was due to minority populations, 65% due to Hispanic populations. And then I want you to look just at the differences between the 2000 and 2010 to see, for example, that this was the last decade, the last census decade was the decade that we became less than half non-Hispanic white. Somewhere between 2003 and 2004, we believe that occurred. But we're going to look at those. This is the total population. This is the population 18 years of age or older, which for some reason in this state gets a lot of interest in that 18 and over. Happens to be voting age, I think, or something. But if you look at this slide, one of the interesting things here that I'll point out is, again, the growth. Non-Hispanic whites accounted for 20% basically of the growth in that population. Hispanics for 56%, African Americans about 13%, Asians and others for about another 11%. But I want you to note on this particular slide that if you look at Texas population, of that, about half of our population of people 18 years of age or older are non-Hispanic white. About a third are Hispanic. Now let's look at less than 18, and you basically reverse those two. If you notice that right-hand column number, the 33.8, that's the percent of under 18 that is non-Hispanic white, okay? And you can see for Hispanics, it's 48%. So the population coming is very different than the population, the adult population going forward. And we'll talk about aspects of that going forward. Why don't I do something very simple now, and we'll do it relatively quickly. And that is, we're going to look at each of these 4 racial and ethnic groups, and we're going to look at where the growth is in that group. And blue in these patterns will mean that that county is increasing in that population group. Red will mean that it's declining in that population group. Well, this is Texas non-Hispanic white population. You can see, as you know, we have 254 counties. You'll see some that are pinkish or white. Those are ones that had too small a number in that group to actually count. Some of those are very small counties. But you'll see that of our 252, we had 161 that were declining in non-Hispanic white populations. We had 91 growing, and you can see how concentrated that growth is in terms of those areas that we talked about, often called the Texas Triangle, from Dallas down to San Antonio and on over to Houston. Well, this is the non-Hispanic white population. This is the Hispanic population. We had, of our 250 counties that had enough Hispanics to count, we had growth in 228. We had decline in only 22. This is the African American population. Lots of counties with too few to really legitimately talk about change in. You can see there was a decline in 102. There was growth in 83. If we look at the Asian population, we had about 97 growing, about 7 declining. And you can see that that growth was very much concentrated again in the triangle and in some other areas. Now, those other areas that you'll see on blue on there tend to have one of 2 characteristics. Either they have a large university or they have large medical centers. And so you'll see that kind of factor whether you look at Texas or other areas. Okay, but this is Texas. Everybody knows that Texas is diverse. Let's look at the United States for just a few minutes. I want you to first of all notice that if you look at the percent of total change due to non-Hispanic whites, it's 8% in the United States. Not 12% or 11% as it was in Texas, but only 8%. 92% of the net growth in the U.S. population from 2000 to 2010 was due to minority populations, and 55% was due to Hispanics, another 13, almost 14% to African Americans, almost 16% to Asians, 6.6% to people of multiple racial categories, etc. And yes, we are a country that is still about 2/3 non-Hispanic white, but that shift was a 6% shift as well. Well, let's again look at child populations. Notice the numerical change. The number of non-Hispanic white children in the United States declined by 4.3 million. That doesn't mean they died off. It means they moved into other ages and they weren't replaced at the same level. Notice, on the other hand, the number of non-Hispanic or number of Hispanic children increased by 4.8 million. In fact, if it had not been for the growth in the number of Hispanic children, we would have had one of the largest declines in our child population in U.S. history. So you see the pattern is even more advanced when you look at it in terms of children. Well, let's look at the U.S. again. Again, blue means growth, red means decline, so we'll look at the U.S. as a whole. We have about 3,200 counties. We had a decline in non-Hispanic white populations in about 1,700. We had increases in about 1,500. If you look at the Hispanic population growth, well, if you're one of those people that thinks Hispanic population growth is California, Texas, Florida, and New York, and maybe New Mexico and Arizona thrown in, you're wrong. It is a pervasive pattern. Now, there are some counties certainly up in the Upper Great Plains that have too few to count, but basically of the 2,800 that had enough Hispanics to count, there was increases in 2,700 of those counties. There was declines in only 100. This was the Hispanic population. This is the African American population. And although there was lots of decline, and those, by the way, those red counties, are counties that were part of the old rural South. And even in Texas, those areas tended to lose African American populations. 2-to-1 growth to decline, however, nationally. And if you look at Asian populations, about 16-to-1 growth to decline in terms of counties of the United States. What's going on? Let's look at Texas for just a minute. Notice this is in 2000, and there was only one group in 2000, that's the less than 5, in which the absolute number of Hispanics exceeded the absolute number of Anglos or non-Hispanic whites. One group, 2000. 2010, all age groups through age 34. The absolute number of Hispanics exceeded the absolute number of Anglos. So the point of it is, anybody who thinks that this is a slow process and, you know, it'll take decades and decades to see the kind of change we're looking at, really needs to look at the data, I would argue, a little more closely. These are census data. These aren't data that anyone projected or brought forward. This is what the United States looked like in 2000. And just to give you an idea what's happening there, just look at that left-hand most group and see, for example, that 41.3%, and this we just put Anglos and all non-Anglos together. And you can see there was about 41% Anglo, about 59%. That difference was about 18%. If we go to the next decade, what do we see about that 18 or 21% in those first two columns? They're now substantially reduced. The United States is going to have the same kind of patterns, and we'll talk about some of that a little bit later. In fact, this is what the Census Bureau projected through 2050. And so by 2050, they say this will be the case in terms of the United States as a whole. Well, why are these dull old demographic patterns important anyway? I argue they're important because due to a variety of historical, discriminatory, and other factors, these demographic characteristics are tied to socioeconomic characteristics. They are tied to the resources that people have to buy goods and services in the private sector. They are tied to the resources that people have to pay taxes in the public sector. And if we do not change the socioeconomics that go with our demographics, we will, as we change our population, change the very socioeconomic structure, the very economy of the United States and of Texas. Let's look at why this is the case. And again, we're going to use a lot of slides, but we're going to do them very quickly because I want you to just look at one pattern. First of all, this is the United States as a whole. And notice that if you look for every group except Asians, there was a significant decline in income from 1999, which is the reference year for income for the 2000 census, and then 2010 we actually had 2010 numbers. Those are significant declines for every group except Asians. But what I want to concentrate on so we can compare areas very quickly is simply the percentage comparison between Hispanics and African Americans in poverty and non-Hispanic whites. Notice that it's about 3 to 1 when we look here, 2.5 to 3 as we go forward. And now let's look at that for not only the United States, but for Texas. They're about 2 to 3 to 1. If you look at Austin, they're about 2 to 1 in 1999, closer to 3 to 1 in 2010. When you look at them for Dallas, they're about 3 to 4 to 1 in both of those periods of time. If you look at Houston, they're again about 3 to 1 in both the periods of time. And San Antonio, what you'll see is if you looked at the percentages for Hispanics and African Americans, but percentages particularly for Hispanics, they're lower. Why is that? Some people ask me. And the only explanation I can give for you is that, you know, the Hispanics in San Antonio include many Hispanics that have been there for generations. Hispanics have been in San Antonio as long as there's been a San Antonio. And in fact, I always, reflect on the fact the first time I went to San Antonio, I was driving along and I saw this exit and it said that Fredericksburg Road. I said, oh, this is a good German city. But the next one was De Zavala Road. It indicated that multiple origin basis of San Antonio. So many of these Hispanics in San Antonio have been there multiple generations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, let's talk about the U.S. and other factors. Here I'm going to look at education. We'll look again, just to do it fast, quickly. We're going to look at one factor, and that is I want to look just at the percent of Hispanics with less than a high school degree. And so, example, we'll see here, this is the United States. That was 38%. For Texas, it was 40%. And now I'm going to shift to the third column down, just to kind of keep you on your toes. In Austin, it's 39%. In the city of Dallas, it is 56%. In the city of Houston, it is 51%. And in San Antonio, it's 29%. Well, what do we think the future is going to look like? We did some projections. These are the Census Bureau's projections, and these are in thousands, so that 420 is 420 million people. When you look at the increase this is the increase in each of the racial and ethnic groups. You can see that the total, that, for example, there's this negative number for non-Hispanic whites. That is because every projection I know of now projects that in fact, nationally, you may have saw a press release a couple of weeks ago that points out that we are already in a state in the United States where there are more non-Hispanic white deaths than non-Hispanic white births. So we're seeing this pattern, and what's it mean is that if you look at the total change, when someone first brought me this chart when they were doing it for me, I said, wait a minute, this is a pie chart, it's got to add up to 100%. What have you got the non-Hispanic whites up there? Well, I guess by putting there a 0, we indicate there's going to be no contribution to future population growth in the long term from non-Hispanic whites. It's all going to be due to minority populations. About 61% by the Census Bureau's projections are going to be due to the Hispanic population. If we look at this and look at the thing we always talk about, which is the aging of the population, if you add the 65, and there's a mistake on that, there should be 65 to 84, you see that we're talking about 13% now in 2010. By 2060, we're talking about 22% of our population that is elderly. This chart, I want you to, this is 2010, and if you look at white alone, you see in every age group, non-Hispanic whites are over 50% of the population. Now let's look at 2050, the same column, 2060, the same column, and you can see there's only one age group by then that non-Hispanic whites are more than 50% of the population. Well, what about Texas? We did some work with the state demographer's office where I used to be and did some projections looking forward. We projected under that bottom scenario growth going about where it was in the last decade, which has been pretty similar to that in a couple of first years of this decade, that we'd have about 55 million people in Texas by 2050. We don't go to 2060. We're a little less daring than Census Bureau. This is the percentage increases. You can see only under the fastest rate of growth scenario, which is the bottom one, does the non-Hispanic white population increase at all by 5% over 40 years. On the other hand, the Hispanic increases by 224%. We think between now and 2020 and probably closer to 2020, we will be a state that is a plurality Hispanic. And by 2050, we're looking at 55% of our population being Hispanic, about 22% being non-Hispanic white. And in this chart, we're looking at the net change. So if you look at this bottom, these four sum to the 100%. Only 2% of our growth from 2010 to 2050 will be due, under the highest growth scenario for non-Hispanic whites, due to non-Hispanic whites. 70% due to Hispanics. We will have a situation where among non-Hispanic whites, about 27%, if you look at that bottom line, 27.7% of non-Hispanic whites will be 65 plus, compared to about 13% for Hispanics, about 19% for African Americans, 14% for Asians and others. But because of the size differences, if you look at it in terms of what proportion of 65 will be in each of the racial and ethnic groups, the largest single group of elderly people will be Hispanic, at 42.5% of all elderly. In fact, you know, one of the things I always tell students is that certainly when they look at people like me, they say, how many of you old people are there going to be to take care of? And I like to tell them, get ready. Because here, the blue counties are those that in 2010 had 20% or more of their population that was elderly. And you know, that's such percent we always hear of. 1 in 5 Americans will be 65 years of age or old. It said it like it's some kind of disease that's going to happen to us. And you can see, look at this 2010, and now look at 2050. Well, I know that our student member of the board will be glad to know that you will still be able to live in College Station and not be around all of the elderly, because Brazos County is one of those that would not be. But you can see how clear we are going to have in terms of a very large and pervasive population.
Dr. Murdoch, have you studied the impact of 65 being the new 45, though?
Yes, in fact, I've looked at my own age and said, I believe it. It's absolutely true. Some of my students that don't believe it, but anyway, that's when they're trying to help me use my, iPhone and stuff like that. Or my grandson who says, what do you mean you can't text? Okay, let's talk about education. We know that education pays. And, you know, with this group, you don't have to talk about that very often, but I think it's important to note, this is a slide from, as you can see, you can barely see, it's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But if you could see, as you can see on the slide up in the thing, that line up there is the unemployment rate in the country. And notice that everyone with an associate degree or more had employment rates that were less than that national average. And if you looked at income, you can see the difference between that less than high school and that median weekly earnings. Now, another table that I provided that you can look at your leisure shows that, you know, it happens, education pays. It pays in every level, from professionals down to operatives and laborers. Those with more education make higher incomes. That's true for all racial and ethnic groups. Now, what is different is there are differences when you compare the same occupational level, same occupation. There are differences between non-Hispanic whites and blacks and Hispanics, etc. Non-Hispanic whites make more, and there's a variety of reasons for that. One of it is that this is income from all sources. So in many cases, they're not first-generation PhDs or first-generation college graduates. They're second or third or fourth. That's more likely to be true for non-Hispanic whites than it is for Hispanics or African Americans. But education pays for everybody. So let's look a little bit from a demographer standpoint of the state of education. This is Texas growth in community college and public universities together. You know, you had pretty good growth. From 2000 to 2010, about, as you can see, a pretty good increase overall, about 52% growth in enrollment. And you saw it at all levels. But notice that all those population figures that we talked about for less than 18, which you would expect to be reflected somewhat in these figures, well, the number of kids, the percentage of kids in these different racial and ethnic groups does not coincide. That is, there are higher proportions of non-Hispanic whites in college than there are of Hispanics or African Americans. A lot of factors related to that. This is a slide, and I want to point out on this one that we're talking about here data as provided by the Census Bureau, and so it tells us about our total population, but it doesn't necessarily tell us about the kids that have been through our higher education or other systems, because some of these people will contribute these numbers who migrated to our state during these periods of time. Well, one of the things that I think we need to look at as a state is that if you look, for example, at that percent high school graduates and higher, and you compare the figure for 1990 to 2000, you'll see, for example, that, and let's compare it for non-Hispanic whites to Hispanics, it's about, about 8.5% increase for non-Hispanic whites. But you notice it's a 15% increase for Hispanics. So there's been some closure. Unfortunately, when we begin to look at it for percent college graduates and higher, you can see about a 9% increase for non-Hispanic whites, only about a 4.3% increase for Hispanics. We actually didn't close that gap very much. Now again, keep in mind that this is everybody. So immigrants and migrants will have affected these numbers. This does not talk about people that have just been involved in our higher education system, but it does mean as a state that we have some big challenges that we need to address. This, of course, talks about funding. And you know, when you look at the total percent change, the right hand next to the last column, we see, we looked at growth in enrollment, what it was, and we see now the growth in funding. I think the thing, and I'm glad to see that we know that in each of the last two sessions we've addressed this in part, but if our figures are correct, the per student expenditures on higher education by the state of Texas decreased by 28% from 2000 to 2010. Now, we know what that was in part from that period of time with the recession, and I'm hoping that the new numbers reverse some of this. This is what we see as we go forward, and this shows increased demand based on what we were funding at 2010 levels. You can see the billions of dollars that are involved for public college and universities. You only need to increase the funding about $3.2 billion. I don't think that'll be a problem, will it, Ray? Over the next 40 years. This is enrollment. We'd expect enrollment, if you take all public colleges and universities and you compare that this figure right here, the 1,276 to the bottom, 2,384, again about 1.1 million new students in public colleges and universities over the next 40 years. And notice that if you look at where the increase is going to be, notice the non-Hispanic white numbers. Nearly all percentages are negative, and increases substantially for Hispanics and for Asian populations and for African American populations. We expect by 2050 that about 22% of people in public colleges and universities will be non-Hispanic white, about 13% will be African American, about 50% will be Hispanic, and about 15% will be Asian and other. There's good news in that, in the sense we see those percentages going up substantially. There's also some reason to ponder these somewhat, because they will not reflect the population of college age. They are below what they should be to reflect our population of college age. And so with net changes, you see we expect net declines in the number of non-Hispanic white students at all levels, from the public universities to the community colleges. And then we looked a little bit at this unmet financial need. And again, this is simply taking what was there in 2010 and projecting them on. I think the figure that's probably pretty sobering is if you look at all students with unmet financial need, we expect that will go from about 687,000 to 1.4 million students over the next 40 years. So I think any indication that that's going to slow down if we don't change the socioeconomics, that's unlikely. This shows the percentage increase in those, and you'll note if you compare this slide to an earlier one, that the greater increases are in those populations that have the lower socioeconomic resources. Their percentages in these categories exceed the percentages of the population. This is the percent with various levels, and again, we expect to see, this is 2010, we expect to see some increase in all of these, 20,000 and above unmet need as we go forward in time. And so, what do we think this means? And I'm going to go ahead for a few minutes, and then I'm going to come back for just a few minutes. It won't take us very long. We asked the question of what happens if nothing happens. If things remain as they were in 2010, and we don't change any of the factors, and we would argue particularly the factors related to education, what happens? Well, this shows in 2010 constant dollars that the average household in Texas in 2050 would be $7,700 poorer in 2010 constant dollars than the average population was in 2010. Now, that may seem alarming, and people may say, well, what does this strange demographer do this for? Why is he doing this? Well, we're looking at it the same way some others are. McKinsey & Company did a study in the latter part of the last decade, and their basic bottom line was that if the United States did not close the educational gaps between racial and ethnic groups, the effect would be equivalent to a permanent recession in the U.S. economy. Now, that's not me. That's not an academic. That's a fairly well-known consulting firm looking at this particular issue. That doesn't make them any better or worse or any lesser, more fallible, I hope. But it does indicate that this is a really increasing kind of, I think, consensus. We could have some positive effects if we close the educational gaps, however. Here you see, for example, we expect that we'd be about $72.2 billion in annual state tax revenues. If we could close those gaps, we'd add another $11.4 billion per year to state tax revenues. Here's what would happen in terms of what we would call enrollment, right? In other words, if we take, this is just the public universities, And if you take the rates that in 2010 and apply them to the population as we expect it to be in 2050, we expect about 961,000 people in public universities. Saw that on an earlier chart. But if we closed the gaps so that the same proportion of kids in other racial and ethnic groups went to college as the proportion of non-Hispanic whites that go to college, that enrollment would be 1.4 million, not 960,000. So we're seeing, and we put that together with the benefits involved with college graduation. You see some of the reasons why education gets the stick that it is. Here, I'd simply like to point out where we are on some factors in education because they're sobering. We still have a ways to go. We can see that these are mostly public schools, but we're 30th in percent of population 25 over have completed a bachelor's degree. Some of us, most of us, I would grant all of us here believe Texas can do better than that. Well, I had to show you this because I knew that all of you were deeply moved. But what are the demographic realities that face us? Well, the reality of it is, whether you look at the country or you look at Texas, there are really now two quite different populations. One is an aging, literally off the end of the life chart set of non-Hispanic whites. Now, why do I say that? Well, the non-Hispanic white birth rate has been below replacement for nearly 25 years now. And in case someone thinks it's coming back, well, the average non-Hispanic white woman in the United States and in Texas is 42 years of age. So if we're going to have a bunch more babies, we'd better get at it. In fact, my colleague at Rice, Steve Kleinberg, who many of you know, has said to let everyone know that he is willing to help in any way that he can. And there may be other volunteers here. I don't want to finish that. But the point of it is that, you know, populations grow either from natural increase, excess of births over deaths. And Texas, by the way, is very close to being a situation where there will be more non-Hispanic white deaths than births. Not quite there yet, I don't think, but very close. And could we increase the other way? Through immigration. Well, where would immigrants that are non-Hispanic white have to come from? At least historically, they'd have to come from Europe. And Europe is the oldest, slowest growing major region of the world, and the only major region of the world that the United Nations projects to have fewer people in 2050 than it did in 2000. That is why nearly all analysis I know, including census analysis, suggests that we will have a continued decline in that population. Well, the other population is a rapidly growing minority population. If you look at some of the factors related to it, for example, the average Hispanic woman in the United States and in Texas is 28 years of age. Well, there's a lot of childbearing years between 28 and 42. And although immigration in some cases, in some ways, has lessened the last few years, certainly during the recession, the long-term projections by the Census Bureau are that if we do the highest rate of growth, we will have in the United States as a whole about 150,000 migrants to the United States from that would be from Europe and other areas that are predominantly non-Hispanic white. But we would continue to have, at a minimum, at least 500,000 Hispanic immigrants. Now, they could be wrong. Demographers are often wrong in terms of their projections. I often say that if it weren't for economists, there wouldn't be anyone who made worse projections than demographers. Okay. I probably lost some economic colleagues at that point. But here's the bottom line. The reality of it is, whether you look at Texas or whether you look at the United States, that the future of those areas is tied to their minority populations. And how well they do is how well Texas and how well the United States of America will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murdoch. Pretty compelling statistics. We all were deeply moved. Questions, board members?
and I'll leave these slides with you, and you guys can distribute them as you need to.
Please do. I have a feeling we'll probably have a lot of requests for the data.
Okay.
It's particularly striking in that we've, the first 13 years of closing the gaps, we've increased Hispanic enrollment and Hispanic graduations by over 100%, and we haven't even been treading water completely.
Yeah, and some of that is the result of in-migration of new people that damper down those rates. So, but it's still a challenge.
Commissioner?
My question is, and it relates to the point that you just made, is there a way of separating out Hispanics who've been in the country for a while, as opposed to recent immigrants, whether legal or illegal? Because my suspicion is that because immigration has been so strong, and particularly in Texas and in California, that some of the gains we've made have been disguised or been hidden by the replenishment of people at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. Do we have data that allow us to look at how the long-standing population, Hispanic population in this country is done?
Well, we have data, and the problem is that meshing it with agency kind of data, whether we're talking about your agency or the national level, is because some of the people involved have been in undocumented status. Now, in Texas, we think the total number of those is in the 1.8 million range. Estimates from the Pew Hispanic Center, for example, put us at 1.7 to 1.9 million. Put the country, by the way, at 11 or 12, sometimes 13 million. Let me just say there's a lot of debate about that, and lots of people that say that's way too low. I've heard that it's 20 million. I'll give you the response on that, however, of the demographer who does the best work on that. His name is Jeff Purcell. He's a graduate of the University of Texas demography program, and his family's from Texas. He still lives in Dallas. And I said to him one day, I said, Jeff, how do you know it's not 20 million? I hear that figure all the time. And he says, because there's one thing you cannot hide, and that is dying. And he said, if there are really 20 million, these are the healthiest group of people who have ever walked the face of Earth, because they die at a rate of about, 11 to 13 million. And our figures are derived from theirs. But yes, I think it's possible and we can refine these somewhat. We can't refine them because we can't know. We get much better response when we look at what we get in the census. It's pretty clear we're getting most of undocumenteds in most parts of the census. Now, that does not mean all, but that at the same time doesn't help us sort out documented and undocumented in a way that helps us to do what you want to do. But I agree with you. I think we would find a different set of events if we could distill that down.
Yeah, I have a feeling that this has been my view for a number of years, that that educational attainment in the long-standing Hispanic population, particularly in states like California, Texas, to a lesser extent New Mexico, is been more significant than the disaggregated data show.
Yeah, well, I think an indication that you may very well be correct, I think, is the data I talked about for San Antonio, where if you look at those factors, they are generally higher for Hispanics in San Antonio than they are in Dallas or Houston. And if you look at the recency of persons in terms of those areas, which you can see in terms of migration, you don't know whether it's undocumented or documented, but migration to Houston or to Dallas or to San Antonio, and then you put that as a percentage of Hispanic population, it is much greater in places like Dallas and Houston than it is in San Antonio. So I think there's credibility that what I do say is that the state's challenge is still to get all people competitive. And again, I understand the concern. I'm not trying to say that anything in there about what the higher education system is doing, simply that the challenge for the state remains substantial.
Janelle?
In your projections for growth, are you looking at the fact that normally, second generation, third generation Hispanics normally have smaller families, normally have similar to what we even, you said, talking about the Germans, when they immigrated to Texas, had huge families, and we just don't see that anymore.
Well,
so.
we do in the sense that we have multiple scenarios that look at different levels.
And that's why you had the three
and we
different.
talked about one simply for time purposes here, but we have different rates for particularly for immigration, which plays a role in that in decreasing.
And we know for a fact that those second-generation Texans tend to be more interested in education and, what my salary is really going to be and things like that.
Well, I mean, I think it is important to say, however, that even if you control for generations, Hispanics as a whole tend to have higher fertility than Anglos, non-Hispanic whites, for a variety of factors. But I think that they do decrease with multiple generations in general.
If there's any further questions? Dr. Murdoch, we really appreciate the presentation. That's some great data, and you're correct about economists. So it's kind of like the way we brag about ourselves versus Mississippi.
When is your book coming out?
Oh, it'll be out this fall. It's called Changing Texas: Implications of answering or ignoring the Texas Challenge.
We'll order copies for all of our board members and our senior staff, so you'll get at least 20 sales.
By the way, it is coming out with the A&M Press.
Yes. Okay.
I want an autograph copy. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, can we make sure we all get copies of this presentation?
We'll make that happen. Now we will begin agenda item 5. The recognition of excellence is meant to showcase models of excellence within the education community and highlight the outstanding work of our education faculty and administrators and institutional programs around our state. The Blend Team is a collaborative between Texas A&M University and Blend College. This program provides students an alternative enrollment pathway to a major university. Dr. Chris Boyd, Executive Director of the Transition Academic Programs at Texas A&M, Dr. John Beaver, Dean of Academic Affairs for the Bryan campus of Blend College, and Dr. Russ Graves, Director of the Blend Team at Texas A&M University, will make a presentation to us today on the benefits of the Texas A&M Blend Team program. Welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting us. I'm Chris Boyd. And about 17 years ago, I made a passing remark, and it was after witnessing a rather painful season for the admission office in April and May, after admission letters had stopped going out. And I said, gee, what if, rather than it being all yes or all no, what if we took another group of these students and said, if you're willing to enroll and take most of your classes at Blend, we'd let you have one class at A&M, and you could begin your 4-year experience. And about 15 years ago, an implementation committee they began to assemble the committee. And beginning this fall, we'll have our 13th year of the Texas A&M Blend Team program with the admission of our next cohort. There were a lot of reasons. A&M and Blend have had close relationships in the past, and once the discussion started, it just seemed like a natural fit.
About the basics.
Here.
To tell you a little bit about the basics of the program, participants in the Texas A&M Blend Team program are selected from the regular applicants to the university. They meet all of the admission requirements. It was designed as a 2-year program with specific admission criteria at the end of that time for those students who complete 45 Blend credit hours with a 3.0 grade point average and 15 A&M credit hours with a 3.0 grade point average. They're offered full admission at the end of the program. The program doesn't guarantee entry into a particular major, The students have to plan ahead and take prerequisite courses to qualify for the majors they want. The way it works is that students take the majority of their courses at Blinn College. They take up to 5 credit hours at Texas A&M, which gives them one solid academic course and usually an extra course like a kinesiology credit. And they are allowed and encouraged to apply for transfer admission during this time. Students who don't earn the full admission at the end of the program because of hours or grades and also have not been accepted through the transfer process can qualify for admission later as returning former students. The flow chart that you see here shows the ways that students can gain admission. They sort of take a dual track approach. They're always working toward that 2-year goal of completing the 45 Blinn credits and the 15 A&M credits. But during that time, they may step aside from that and submit an application for transfer admission. There's no guarantee of transfer admission, but many of them aspire to gain that earlier. So at the end of that time, if they haven't been accepted as a transfer applicant and if they haven't completed the automatic admission criteria, then they can apply as former students, and a number of students gain admission in that way. In order for this program to be successful, all participants must benefit, and that's true for Blinn College, it's true for Texas A&M, and it's particularly true for the students. Some of the benefits that the students enjoy is the opportunity to have a 4-year flagship university experience as opposed to starting elsewhere and transferring in and maybe having a 1 or 2 year flagship experience. They are able to qualify for financial aid through a consortium agreement. Their Blinn credit hours added to their A&M credit hours qualify them for federal financial aid. Many of them live in campus residence halls. They attend A&M sporting events. They enjoy cost savings based on the Blinn, smaller fees and tuition, which we'll show you more about in a moment. They enjoy the smaller classroom environment at Blinn College than the large lecture hall environment of the university. And they can participate in student activities on both campuses.
Good morning. I'm with an august group here. We all started this program together. I guess it's kind of strange that we've been working on this together for 13 years. The next slide, I still call them slide. I'm old school. I guess it's a PowerPoint. Shows the difference between Blinn tuition and A&M tuition. And as you can see, the cost savings are big. And we were talking earlier today about helping students get through school. Well, you take a look at this. Over 4 semesters, students are going to save about $6,000 working their way into admission to A&M University.
The benefits to A&M is the admission of quality students who would otherwise have been denied. We're able to increase our lower division enrollment without pulling resources away from upper level capacities. And we found ourselves in a leadership role, not anticipated at the time, but we very quickly had contacts from several of the universities saying, oh, we heard you're doing something, tell us about it. And we've actually had a couple more since these that we've listed here. And again, to go back to the point that's been made, every time we've talked to these people, they are developed for, the 3 legs of the stool can be very different at other universities in terms of the 2 institutions and the student of what's the benefit, what is the incentive that they want to do this. And so that's the point we've always made. We did a presentation to the higher ed committee, and because we wanted to make sure people understood that there can be very different benefits for Baylor, for example. Can they do a program with MCC where, the whole package ends up costing them a lot less than doing all 4 years at Baylor? But they may need to provide some additional, financial scholarship kind of incentives there that we have not found necessary to provide. So, And there's other universities that we may not have talked to, but we're aware they've got similar programs to, several others around the United States.
I've really personally noticed the difference, the benefit to Blinn. I came to Blinn in '97, been there 17 years. And in '97, the community college, Blinn, looked down the street to the other city. We affectionately called A&M the gorilla, in size. There was some distance there, and you can understand why. Community college, we really don't talk to that institution. So in my opinion, the team program opened a lot of doors. I mean, I'm sitting with 2 A&M colleagues now. I think we talk a couple of times a month, if it's down to registration time, a couple of times a day. This is not uncommon also with our division heads, who need to talk to the A&M department heads about aligning programs, figuring out how to streamline the team program. We're on a first-name basis with a lot of our colleagues now, and I think that in and of itself is a wonderful step ahead. Also, our different divisions, for instance, counseling had to get together, our Blinn counseling with the A&M counseling, and figure out how we're going to do this team thing. Financial aid was a big thing. We started out offering it at Blinn. It didn't go as well as we thought it would, so now it is offered at A&M, but that all had to be worked out between the two bodies. Registration was another one. I mean, can you imagine registering all of these team students at Blinn? We had to talk, we had to exchange transcripts and things like that. And I was talking to Dr. Graves this morning, and I said, how has team affected A&M transportation? And he said, well, we have 80 buses. They run between A&M and Blinn. At any given time, 57 of them are in operation. We have added a lot of buses, I think, because of the team program. You've got now 1,200 students going back and forth. Surprisingly, not everyone has cars like we think the students did. That's a good thing. I started out with a 52 Plymouth that burned a quart of oil every 100 miles, and I like to see these students start where I did. Another great thing is we are beginning this year something called Team E, and that is a program of team and engineering. We're starting a cohort at Blinn where we have a series of math and chemical engineering classes. What Team E is, and you two can correct me if I'm wrong, is that by 2025, Texas A&M wants to substantially increase its engineering students. And what a better way than to put some of this into the team effort where we're glad to do it, where we can help and give the undergraduate classes. Also, an unexpected consequence was the study abroad program. Team students are now joining our Blinn students on study abroad for our mini-mesters. We have an art history class that goes to the museums of Europe, and we've had some team participation, and we hope that will grow. In terms of classroom learning environment, you know that community colleges are an open-door institution. That's our mission. The Blinn team students come in with a real drive to hold that 3.0, a real drive to earn their way to A&M, and that helps in the classroom a lot. I think it sets an example for other students, as that's why they're here, to go to the university. We are a gateway institution. Most students earn about 10 hours with us. So while we have them, we want them to be serious and build a good transcript. And contributions to Blinn are that we have the highest transfer rate to four-year schools of any other community college in Texas. We're very proud of that, and that is due in part to Blinn team. Oh, it's me again. This graph, you will see that team participation where we started in 2001. We originally, and I remember that meeting very well, where do we start this thing? And we thought about 375 would be a good start because we had to build the program. We have to reserve classes for the students that are coming in. You can't just have them come in and not have classes. So now you see that we are at 2013 up to 1,200 students. There's a reason for that, and there are several reasons for that. Well, one is we are just trying to grow the program as the resources are there, and it's been successful, and so that's you can see where the program is going. I suspect that there will be even more students in the near future.
3/4 of the participants in the Texas A&M Blend Team program matriculate fully to Texas A&M, and this chart shows that. You'll notice that 52% of the students have been able historically to transfer, and that's within the 2 years. The surprise on the slide, perhaps, is that only 7% remain in the program for the full 2 years and earn the automatic guaranteed admission. But we also pick up a lot of students, 17% historically, who did not achieve transfer admission. They saw they were going to fall short of the 3.0 GPA, but yet were in very good standing, and they qualified for readmission. Many of them will voluntarily sit out of the program the 4th semester to qualify themselves as former students and return in that way. Thus, you see 3/4 of the students who start the program matriculate to the university.
And here again are some numbers. We are in our 13th year with 5,800 participants having gone through the program. This fall, of course, we'll have 1,200. The next one we're very proud of, the state transfer rate to colleges is, for community colleges is about 27%. Blend transfer rate is 49%. Again, I think this is in part due to the team program. And the graduation rate of those who matriculate is 88%. I think that's astounding. I was reading in the Chronicle of Higher Education a couple of months ago that nationwide, those freshmen who come to community colleges after 6 years, only 15% of them have degrees, 15% nationally. So this is an astounding statistic of the graduation rate of those who matriculate. 10% of team students graduate earning Latin hours.
And to wrap it up, to talk about some lessons learned. Even with the committee, an implementation committee that included faculty, staff, administrative representatives from both schools that met for better part of a year and a half at least, it didn't take 1 week once the students arrived, and it didn't take 2 days for somebody to ask a question, and we went, you know, gee, that we never really expected that one. Just if you're curious, one of the first ones was, how does my transfer work that I took prior to enrolling as a freshman count? And those hours were allowed to count towards the blend hour requirement, but when it came to the grade requirement, that was still going to be determined just by the blend grades or the A&M grades. But it became the implementation committee. You know, there were times when they got through stuff quickly. There were times when it was bogging down. There are times when it was incredibly effective to have, you know, the president walked in one day and said, here's my vision, and boy, it made things just start sailing right through. So it's important to have buy-in, and sometimes having express buy-in at a lot of levels. And then identify the critical issues early. The team included representation from admissions, from faculty, from financial aid, definitely the technology interface. We do trade transcripts every semester once grades are posted, but financial aid needs transcripts more often than that for their accounting records, so that you have to put together a consortium agreement so that can happen. There was a lot of concern about how difficult that is at first. Once we got into the do-it mode, that actually wasn't that difficult to do. And then include the student affairs folks and financial aid folks to make identifying possible problem areas ahead of time. And one that we didn't identify up front was that there was a rule at A&M that students must be enrolled in at least 6 hours to assume a leadership position. Now, you might think that's freshman class president. No, there's a huge number of positions across our campus, like fish camp counselors, that were considered leadership. The neat thing about the students is even though most of the times, as Russ says, they don't wear blue blend T-shirts, they believe they're maroon. But in this case, even though they were new freshmen, they were going forward by the spring saying, when I went to fish camp, not a single person could answer my questions about blend team. So I think there ought to be some team students who are allowed to be fish camp counselors next year so they can do that, and everybody goes, you're right. You know, so it's making sure that you're anticipating and facilitating the students to also, you know, it's blossomed, you know, in terms of they've made it what they want it to be too, on both campuses. So with that, we'll let you ask us questions.
Thank you. Members, questions regarding the presentation?
I'd just like to comment. As a student of Texas A&M, I've had a lot of interaction with blend team students, and you know, I think that you all have done a great job. These students are usually, you know, they really care about their education. They're involved. They don't take their education at A&M for granted, and they have, you know, my experience has been very positive with the students. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Any, Bobby?
Just briefly, and as a parent of a son who went through the blend team program, I echo Alice's thoughts. Wonderful, wonderful program. And really one of the things that I was taken away from, and one of y'all made the comments, the sense of urgency to have that grade point average be at a high level. I think that sets a real tone for the rest of their academic career. I mean, they come in knowing I've got to perform at a high level, and that really gets them off with a great start, and I think that's wonderful. The only question I've got, and because you made the comment, is when they're eligible to transfer, but they're not guaranteed what college, right? So do you see kids changing what they thought they wanted to be into different kind of colleges, or then once they're in one, is there transferability into the others, and does that happen very often or very easily?
Transfer admission is totally driven by choice of major, and predominantly there's two. They can put down two choices. When we started, you know, people would really only consider first choice majors. In the last couple of years, that's been softening up some. So Russ does an amazing job of, you know, getting email information out to them electronically, having meetings where he's trying to prep them for here's how you successfully transfer to A&M. You know, some majors will consider you at the end of the freshman year. There's a few majors that they don't want to see you until the junior year. So the only way you can do that is there a way you can somehow complete some courses the summer before your freshman year, summer after your freshman year, then you might be able to get into that major after your third semester. So there's some really hands-on work that is done there. I mean, any student if they're within hour and grade requirements for majors, I mean, sometimes they change their minds. You know, even, you know, my husband did his sophomore year. You know, but you know, hopefully they do it earlier than that. You know, I did mine. His was at the end of the sophomore year. Mine was at the beginning of the sophomore year. When you realize I've been taking these classes and I don't think this is the match for me. You know, so I don't know, Russ, you want to?
Well, if you look at the first choice majors that these students indicated, that profile doesn't exactly match where they're graduating. The engineering numbers shrink and the business numbers shrink and the liberal arts numbers swell. So there is a good deal of shifting of dreams there, if you will. But we do know that students graduate from every major available at the university, from every college. Some are probably underrepresented. The College of Science, the College of Veterinary Medicine with the biomedical science option, and the College of Geosciences have pretty thin slices of the pie, but most students seem to be pretty satisfied with where they're able to reach.
Where they end up.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
We do have an A&M advisor on campus at Blinn Monday through Thursday mornings. You know, one of the folks from my office, or Russ even goes over sometimes to make it convenient for them, since they're spending most of their time on that campus. You know, they can come to our offices too, and we're pretty accessible. We're next to a parking garage. But you know, we did make that available. And that's also one of those communication things that helps, because you find out that maybe you're making changes in some ways they're doing some classes or some prerequisites, or both universities have created a math placement exam that we want freshmen to take before they start signing up for engineering calculus. So to keep the communication flowing there.
Chris?
First, great presentation, very good program. Thank you. Your graduation rate is exceptional. Have you guys tracked the graduation time of a student in this program as opposed to just a traditional entering freshman?
I can address that one. You heard the statistic of 88% of those who matriculate have graduated.
Yes, sir.
If you look at the number of participants and look at the number who graduated who started the program, it's less than that. It's about 65%. We look at a 4-year and a 6-year graduation rate. Those are 6-year graduation rate numbers. These numbers are behind the university as a whole. One of the things we're trying to do is find ways to improve that. But when I first brought this up with the associate provost some years ago, when I saw the numbers starting to emerge, he said, we might not want to advertise those numbers. Those are behind the university average. And then you get different opinions, but we were called to the legislature a few years ago to give a presentation because they were greatly impressed by the numbers. But they are a little bit behind the university averages.
Are you sure about that? 88% is, I think the last time I saw the whole university for a 6-year graduation rate, it was in the mid-80s.
That's for those who, when he say matriculation, he means they moved to full-time status at A&M. So that's once they have made that transition that they're very unlikely to not finish.
All right.
So it would be 65% of those who started the program who graduated, which is behind the university average. Yes, sir.
That puts it in context. Commissioner?
I'm familiar with these kinds of cooperative transfer programs from my California days, but I had a question. The programs that I'm familiar with from California, they typically involved a special suite of courses at the community college that were considered comparable in rigor to the courses offered at the lower division level at the receiving university. I'm talking particularly about a partnership between UCLA and Santa Monica College. The students at Santa Monica College, in order to be guaranteed of transfer and to make sure that they were prepared to do upper division work at UCLA, had to go through an honors program. It wasn't just the general curriculum. Now, are these courses, these students at Blinn just taking courses from the general curriculum, or do you work with a particular subset of courses and faculty with whom A&M faculty have worked to make sure that the rigor and the expectations, the course requirements are similar?
The courses and the division chairs work hand in hand with the A&M departments. They in fact have faculty from A&M teach some of our courses, and A&M has been very satisfied with the rigor. In fact, Chris, I think when we started, the Blinn team students couldn't transfer in credits from any other community college. Isn't that right? I'm trying to recall. Other than Blinn College credits?
No.
Okay, I thought that was it. At any rate, we have that interaction with the faculty. They are very pleased. I can give you some anecdotal evidence, not to embarrass my colleagues, but sometimes students will come to Blinn in the summer to take biology or whatever to get it out of the way on the cheap.
It might be easier.
And it's harder.
Yeah.
And they complain, you're a community college, why is this harder? So, and we do have colleagues who teach from A&M, fewer now, but we used to have quite a few colleagues who would come here, and they use the same standards we do, if that answers your question.
So there is a good deal of collaboration, cooperation between faculty and department chairs at both institutions.
Correct, and the articulation that we did beforehand was to make sure that these courses mesh, and that A&M would be happy with our credits and that the students would do well, and so far it's proved to be so.
You know, some of those little nitpicky details that, you know, can crop up, and even in the last year we've had, is, you know, we've both changed computer systems in the last 3 years, and we now have the capacity to program in prerequisites that we didn't before. That hasn't always happened, you know, duplicate ways. So we've had to communicate about that. Another one, just in terms of nitpicky little details that you sort out along the way that he saves us all the time, is you have to make sure final exams, you will run into final exam conflicts, and somebody has to solve those problems. You know, so we've been real lucky so far, but we've been doing it 13 years now. So.
And another interesting thing, I'm not complaining, but what I have to do every year is look at the number coming in, and then I have to set aside all the courses that those blend team students can take. There are about 10 or 12 courses they traditionally take. And I go to the division chairs and I tell them, okay, save 3 seats in each one of these courses. And so far we've been lucky. Yeah.
A couple questions I had. One is that historically, and by the way, it's hard to believe this has been in place 13 years. I can remember when it was first introduced, and both a former student and a parent of former students. Initially, those first couple of years, there was a lot of skepticism. You know, are they going to be real Aggies? And it's been a tremendous success. It has been, you know, widely. When I have friends whose kids are starting or wanting to enroll at A&M, and they ask me, well, what about this blend team? You know, it has been a real pleasure to be able to describe to them how it works and what a success it's been. The growth kind of came, you know, the first 5 years, you all were in the 300, 350 students, and then it was around 600 for the next 5 years or so. What is the two-part question? What has led to the tremendous growth these last 3 years? You know, now at 1,200 students. I have my suspicions, but I'm curious what you think it is. And secondly, has this, you know, has this model with its success been replicated either here in Texas or at some of the other universities like Purdue or North Carolina who've contacted you?
They actually had that 1,200 number down in the original documents, and after we did the first summer or two of bringing 375 on board, which means at that point in time they showed up all for one conference, at which time Russ and I are having anxiety attacks. We developed some systems in the meantime where we're bringing them in. They actually have required orientations at Blend called Blend Advising Days, and we bring them in for both that and for an A&M New Student Conference. Other things that have happened is our numbers in the general studies majors, we are moving, if students come into general studies, we are moving them more quickly into declared majors. So we've been able to handle more capacity there for the team students. In fact, this summer what we did was they actually were coming to all of our regular new student conferences instead of having these 1 or 2 humongous, everybody in the auditorium is team at the end of the summer. So that's been much more user-friendly, and that's new this summer.
And I think, too, that we have streamlined this program over the last 10 years where we feel comfortable with 1,200. I feel comfortable with even more next year. I'm saying that in advance.
Well, that would be the question that I would have along those same lines. What is the capacity? I mean, you went from 940 to 1,200. What, you know, you feel comfortable with that now, but what is the capacity from both sides, and what might be the future hold for us?
I would say that to increase enrollment in this program, we would have to continue with our expansion of distance learning programs, which we're doing. I think also that we're going to have to expand our faculty, which we're doing, and we're going to have to expand our offerings deep into the evening and maybe on Saturdays, which we're doing. So we're using all of the resources we have, but there's still some flexibility there. And we are looking, I think I can say this, we're looking at another building on the Bryan campus, which would give us more not only classroom space, but office space. So.
In the replication of the program by other universities, have you seen this take root elsewhere?
I haven't checked lately to see the size of the programs that we were consulted about, but initially, at least, they were tiny programs in comparison to what we were doing. Tens of students or maybe 100 students versus over 300.
Yeah.
I mean, it strikes me that as some of our emerging research universities move down the path toward becoming additional Tier 1 universities eventually, that this kind of program would be a welcome way to successfully get transfer students into those flagships.
The folks from Texas State came to visit, and they're going to do one with ACC and Kyle. One nice feature theirs has, we've had at times, but we haven't always had it, is they're going to require the students to live in housing on campus. We've had years where they did have access. We've had a lot of years where the only students who got on campus housing were those in the Corps Cadets. Now that all may be, we've got that new residence hall now, that big new one, and a lot of the commercial ones that may loosen things up more where that happens more often.
It strikes me that one of the keys to success was y'all's collaborative decision early on to allow students to participate in organizations and leadership activities on both campuses. To be in the Corps, to participate in student organizations. I think the only thing I understand that blend team enrollees can't do is play scholarship football or go through sorority rush. Outside of that, everything's
pretty
open.
much. Yeah, there's a couple of club sports they can't, but that's not. I mean, rollerblade hockey. That's not a big draw. So
you don't lose a lot of aspiring hockey players. And
I actually would like to see some sorority. I would like to see some folks try to convince the national sororities that, this is recognized for federal financial aid. Can't they find a way to do that?
So that is a sorority national kind of policy? Because I completely concur with you.
Yeah, fraternities don't have that national regulation. The sororities do.
Right. Any other questions?
We talked to Alice about that.
We actually do take the largest number of upperclassmen in sorority recruitment than any other school in the entire nation. So a lot of the blend team students who end up attending A&M go through recruitment as sophomores or juniors. Mm-hmm. And so we've seen a huge increase in that in the past 5 years. A lot of blend team students have ended up joining
and we're
sororities.
Part of when they might have been held up is because all along, to come in as a transfer, it was more difficult to do it at the end of the second semester during the earlier years. In the last few years, it's become more likely because they are bringing in 10, 12, 15 hours of dual credit, which moves them into the ability to be competitive for those majors faster.
Durga?
Did you all apply for a Star Awards program, or are you familiar with the Star Awards program? Because you're doing such a good job, I think you should apply for a Star Awards program. Have you all applied or no?
We applied twice, yes, sir, but it was in the early years.
It was in the early years.
Nice.
And there were, the first couple of years, there was a lot of doubt from a lot of counters of are they real Aggies? There were letters to the editor and the bat, and all. Some of them were quite humorous. And there were more rough spots being ironed out then. But, particularly once they smoothed out that thing about leadership and, they've got full rights to do almost everything, nobody even asked the question anymore.
Maybe you should apply again.
We will, sir.
Don't be so subtle, Durga. Any further questions or comments, members? Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the vision and particularly the stick-to-itiveness to make this program work and become such a great success. Long overdue to be recognized. So we appreciate your sharing your time this morning. Thank you.
Great program.
Next agenda item is item 6, matters relating to the Committee on Affordability, Accountability, and Planning, chaired by Harold Hahn. Harold, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I personally think that this blend thing is just a way to increase the cult members at A&M.
It's called Manifest Destiny.
Yes. Okay, item 6B. I don't believe there was any public testimony. Is that correct? Nobody signed up? 6C, items 1 through 3 were on the consent calendar. Item 6D is an update on construction and property purchase projects. Are there any questions that you may have, members? I'll give you a moment to find that. If there are no questions, we'll move on. This was an information item only. Item 6E is a report on facilities decisions of projects certified to meet the requirements of the expedited process for approval. If there are no questions, we'll move to the next item. 6F is a report on facilities decisions made by the commissioner or assistant commissioner since the previous board meeting. That's item 6F. No questions. Move to item 6G is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the approval of the nominated members of the formula funding advisory committees for the years 2016 and 17. Gary Johnstone, Deputy Assistant Commissioner, Planning and Accountability, is available to answer questions. Any questions?
I move we accept.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made by Janelle, seconded by Bobby. If there's any further discussion, if not, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 6H is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the Board relating to the approval of the annual Closing the Gaps by 2015 progress report. Susan Brown, Assistant Commissioner of Planning and Accountability, will give a presentation on the report. Susan?
Hi, thank you very much. And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly so that y'all can get to your lunch on time. So let me grab this. As we talked about at the committee meeting, we are actually on track to meet or above track to meet our Closing the Gap success goals. Of course, given Steve's presentation earlier today, you can see where that may not be enough. So we're going to go on. This is the Hispanic enrollment, and as Steve talked about earlier, we've lagged going along the way for the Hispanic enrollment, and even though we have more than doubled our enrollment for Hispanic students, we still need to do more. That is an area that we're working on, and I'm sure we will continue to talk about a great deal. Okay, there we go. African American enrollment growth, we have done a wonderful job, huge growth. However, we have the African American females at 8.8% of the population. African American males are about 5.4%. This is a problem that is across the board. It's not just for the African American community. Hispanic males are behind by 1.2% behind the Hispanic females, and white males are behind by 1.7% behind the white females. So this is the gender issue is something that we're going to need to tackle. and figure out how to get more of the males into the pipeline for college. Success, we've actually surpassed our target already. We were at 236,000, almost 237,000 in 2012. The projection for 2013 is about 252,000, so we are doing really well. However, we do need to do more. Steve talked about where Texas is compared to the other states in the nation as far as the percent of students completing a degree, so we will need to do more. Hispanics were actually above our target for Hispanics, so that is good news that we are doing a good job. One of the things in Steve's presentation, he looked at associate degrees and higher because that's what the census collects. Texas actually includes certificates because we understand that those technical certificates can make a big difference to people and to students as far as getting ahead and getting good jobs. So there's a little bit of a disconnect from what Steve presented in this because we do include certificates.
Susan, you know, I'm glad you brought that up. That was actually a question I forgot to ask Dr. Murdoch. That's a frustration for us in comparing Texas to national data in other states. Is there any thought, whether it's at the Census Bureau or any trend with other states, to begin doing what Texas has done in measuring those technical certificates?
There is one survey that they do. It's called SIP. It's SIPP, and I don't know exactly what the acronym stands for. I can't off the top of my head. But they do break it out. That survey is being revised currently, and it's supposed to be deployed again in 2014. We don't know. I haven't seen what the questions will be, but it did break it out in the 2008 survey. So hopefully that is something that we will start getting on a more regular basis and maybe can get some information that way. It would be national, depending on how large the survey sample is, on whether it's representative by state. But so we're hopeful, but I don't know. There are some states that do collect. I think Florida collects certificates, but I'm not sure. Not all of them even collect individual student data on degrees at all. Some of them only have aggregate information.
Well, there was a report that was distributed recently, I think, to all the board members, an update by Dr. Anthony Carnevale at Georgetown University on his projections. He providing 2020 projected numbers as opposed to 2018, which we'd been looking at before. And it seemed like, didn't he make the shift to breaking out and identifying certificates in his research?
He has some college and certificates combined.
Okay. That
was my understanding. I haven't read it in a while, but I don't think he totally broke them out. If he did, he broke them out nationally, not by state.
Okay.
In his projections. This shows the African American male. Again, we include the certificates in this. And so all these numbers that I'm showing you now also include the ICUT schools, so the independent colleges, and our career schools, the most recent data we have for the career schools. So a lot of what Steve talked about on his education, where he looked at the enrollment growth, that sort of thing, he focuses on the public information. Only for the public universities, that sort of thing. We include everybody, because as a state, we don't really care where they get their education as long as they get their education. This is the allied health and nursing. You can see back in 2005 where we revised our targets. We did that because before 2000, we had about 7 years of decline in the number of nursing and allied health degrees that were awarded. So basically, we were like, stop the letting at this point. Let's just go flat. And then because of programs implemented by the legislature and funded by the legislature, we have the nursing shortage reduction program that y'all have heard about. We have loan repayment programs, all that sort of thing. It has made a difference. So this is the kind of a good news, really good news, is because what we can do is if we can make the right case and get people behind us, there are things that can happen to make a difference. And so that's an important thing to take away from this. Technology, as you can see, this is, oops, we have numbers on here. Every other year are the bar charts. And when you look at these charts, you can see that for basically between 2000 and 2008, we were pretty flat. The good news is that from 10 and 12, we've actually made quite a bit of increase. Not where we want to be by 2015, but we are at least starting to see a pretty good upward trend in those technology awards. One of the things that we will be doing as part of our Beyond Closing the Gaps, and because of SB 414 and 1296 and also the 2036 Commission, is we're going to be going in and reviewing these technology, what is really needed by the state, and be doing a large-scale review of all the critical workforce needs of the state and where we can really need to focus our attention. These are still the areas that were identified in 2000. So we will be updating all of that. Excellence, we have made some progress. Excellence is one of those very hard to quantify. You know it when you see it type things. It's hard to do. We now have 5 institutions that are ranked in the first tier of the best national universities, so that's good. In 2000, I think we had 2 public universities ranked in there, so that is progress. U of H just moved up to that first tier this year, so that's a really good thing.
Susan, I know it's hard to just categorize it, but kind of what are the categories? What are the rankings based on?
The rankings are based on percent of students admitted or accepted, admitted, faculty recognitions, graduation rates, SAT, ACT scores of entering freshmen. I'm sure there are some.
Student-faculty ratio.
Yeah, student-faculty ratio. Oh, alumni giving. I'm getting help from all over the place.
Okay.
So there's a lot of different things that go into that.
And just along that, how many nationally are in the first tier? If we've got 5, that's out of how many in the first tier?
I think the first tier has
about 125.
125 to 150 that are in that first tier. Here's our research numbers, and we have far surpassed. This is our target. It's not our goal. Our goal is the 6.5% of the research obligations. The data from the federal government has not been updated, so it's still the 2009 data that we presented 6 months ago, a year ago, something like that. So we do have new numbers. We have the 2012 numbers for our research expenditures. They went down slightly. Everything I've heard is that has a lot to do with the federal dollars that aren't coming out right now. And so that's why the federal obligations as a percent of the total obligations are so important, is because it gives you some context nationally. Sheer numbers are kind of a little bit harder to include.
There was speaking of context, yesterday at the Council on Continuous Improvement, there was one slide regarding research that you presented that showed that total research expenditures was $4.4 billion.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming this is just public dollars, or
these are universities. These are the research expenditures. The one that I showed you yesterday was the federal dollars because it had comparisons between other states. They include indirect costs. They are able to report their indirect costs on that one. That is something that we don't include here because the state picks up the infrastructure funding.
Well, the thing that I was struck by was not just the aggregate dollars of 4.4 billion, but more importantly, if you look at that 4-year-old data on market share, if you will, of federal research obligations, Texas percentage has improved, not to the 6.5% we targeted, but it's improved. But Texas' relative ranking among the states is still like tied for 6th.
Right.
Whereas if you look at the total dollars reported, we were 3rd among the states, behind only California and maybe New York.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I thought was significant in terms of how it showed where.
And you're also looking at obligations versus expenditures. So you can get a huge grant for $200 million from the federal government. That shows up all in 1 year for those obligations. That doesn't mean that $200 million is going to be spent in 1 year. So if you're looking at expenditures, that $200 million may be for 10 years. Mm-hmm. So, so you're looking kind of at apples and oranges when you're looking at those two. So hopefully Texas, the data we have so far doesn't include the big A&M grant, that obligation, because we don't have the data for all the years yet. So there's things like that we know are coming down the pike. Now, part of those expenditures will have already showed up in 2012 because of the way, they're already expending some of those funds.
I mean, the lesson learned to me is that going forward with our next long-range plan for Texas higher education, we need to, pick measures that capture all, research, not only the federal dollars, which most of us expect to be a declining share, but state and private and corporate dollars. And then secondly, we need to pick metrics that are much more currently measured. And so if the federal government can't overcome this 4-year lag of data, they're sort of irrelevant.
That is one of those things that it's very hard. These do include other dollars, but these are research and development dollars. So that kind of concludes my answering questions.
Members, any other questions regarding the report on closing the gaps? Oh, I'm taking your job away from you.
Fine, just go ahead. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Agenda item 6I is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to new criteria relating to the review of accountability groups. Well, that's a mouthful. Susan Brown, you're still up.
And Judy is going to hand out a page that got forgotten. We had 2 tabs in a spreadsheet, and only 1 tab got PDF'd, so. This is information you were sent earlier, actually. It that shows where each of the institutions are as far as the thresholds that have been recommended. So for the emerging research, the threshold was to be a 2-year average of 20% of the research criteria, which this first time would be 150 million. And then the PhD count, and this shows where the PhD counts for those institutions are. And we went ahead and put at the very bottom of the page how the doctoral institutions look compared to the emerging research institutions on these criteria. And then on in your book, we have for the doctoral comprehensive and the master's programs where they lie in comparison to the criteria for restricted research, PhDs awarded, doctoral programs, and the doctoral enrollment headcount, and whether they meet the 3 out of 4 as recommended by the committee. These were the recommendations that were made by the accountability groups as we met and we discussed some of these. These were their recommendations on how the criteria could be adjusted, since we hadn't looked at it since 2004 when the accountability groups were established originally.
In the emerging research, Texas State is a new addition.
Yes, it is. They became an emerging research 2 years ago. Year ago.
Okay, members, questions, comments? Not, is there a motion to approve item 6I? There's been a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 6J was on the consent calendar, and agenda items 6K, 1, 2, and 3 are also on the consent calendar. Mr. Chairman, this concludes the Committee on Affordability, Accountability, and Planning's portion of the meeting.
Thank you, Chairman Hahn. Well, efficiently and well done. I think that we will skip item 7 for the time being, since we're about an hour ahead of schedule or so, and move to item 8, matters relating to the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success. Did we, before, Janelle, before you start this portion, Bill, we had some public testimony, didn't we? We don't have anybody registered? Okay. So can we take this item out of order?
Consent of the board, sir.
Okay. So with the consent of the board, is there anyone who objects to taking item 8 out of order? Okay. I want to be sure the chairman's okay with that. Yes. Okay. That's a script issue. All right. Well, in that case, let's go ahead and then we'll move to agency operations report under, was that agenda item 9? And then we will come back to 8. And actually, agenda item 9 is the matters relating to the Task Force on Community and Technical Colleges. So we'll do that and then agency operations and then come back to your committee, Janelle. Dennis, do you have a report for your task force?
I do, Mr. Chairman. It'll be brief. The Task Force on Community and Technical Colleges is composed of 3 board members, Durga Agrawal, Manur Lalandi, and myself. The task force is holding a series of regional listening meetings across the state. The purpose of the meetings is to learn more about the best practices for increasing student success, listening to the challenges facing two-year colleges, and to solicit feedback on state priorities and initiatives that directly impact two-year colleges. These meetings are being hosted by community and technical colleges. Hosting colleges invite trustees, presidents, and other interesting stakeholders to attend. Give me just a second, change pages. To date, we have held 4 regional meetings in San Jacinto College, Panola College, McClendon Community College, and most recently, Tarrant County College. The task force members listened to the concerns and solicited input from participants. The information learned from these meetings will guide the force and the work of the task force on community and technical colleges. After conducting the listening sessions, a report will be presented to the board with recommendations and recommended actions for the board and staff so that they can undertake this information to strengthen two-year colleges and improve student success. On May 13, 2013, the 4th regional meeting was hosted by Tarrant County College at the Trinity River campus. Trustees, along with campus presidents and other senior level executives from several North Texas community colleges, participated in the conversations with Dr. Agrawal and myself. College presidents and trustees discussed how credentialing in the field of nursing is changing. Legislation pending at this time which would authorize community colleges to offer baccalaureate level nursing programs were discussed. The meeting participants stated hospitals in the large metropolitan areas are shifting away from hiring associate degree nurses to only hiring baccalaureate-trained nurses. Concern was expressed that this issue is a priority of the community colleges, and they asked for our support. It is my understanding board staff is in the process of developing a study to determine the regions of the state that would benefit from the authorization of baccalaureate degrees programs in the field of nursing at public junior colleges and determine appropriate metrics to assess whether a public junior college should offer those degree programs. The next task force meeting will be hosted by Delmore College on Monday, August the 12th in Corpus Christi. I want to thank Mark Escamilla and his staff at Delmore College for hosting the upcoming meeting. Also, I'd like to extend an invitation to the chief executive officers and trustees of the community and technical colleges in the southern and coastal areas of the state to attend the meeting. We would welcome the opportunity to visit with all of you and discuss student success. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend the meetings, expressing their concerns, and providing input. Input from the field is vital to the success of our task force. I'm excited about these efforts and look forward to strengthening our partnership with our two-year colleges. Mr. Chairman, this completes my report.
Thank you, Dennis. Members, any questions for the Task Force on Community and Technical Colleges? Do you know what the anticipated attendance is at the August 12th regional meeting at Del Mar?
Ms. Gary, I'm going to guess about between 50 and 60 people. We've had some of the meetings just very well attended, and some of them not quite as well as what we want. But we've learned a lot of information. We're gathering some information that at some point we're going to put it in the form of a report. We're going to run it back past the chairman of the board as well as Raymond and the executive staff of the agency, and then make sure that there's plenty of input. We're going to digest it at all levels of the agency, and then at that point we'll bring it forward to the board for their input.
Well, I appreciate you and your task force, Durga, for conducting a successful listening tour.
Yeah, we're probably going to, I would anticipate probably have one or perhaps two more meetings. I'd hoped that we would have completed this by now, or at least by the end of this not calendar year, but academic year. But probably looking at going back out to West Texas. We made one effort to go out there and just didn't quite make it happen, but we're probably going to try to get back out there again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now turn to agenda item 10, matters relating to the Agency Operations Committee. Committee Chairman Munir Lalani was ill and was unable to be with us yesterday or today, so Committee Vice Chair Bobby Jenkins will provide this report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Agenda item 10A is the committee chair's overview, and so during the Deputy Commissioner's report, the following standing reports were reported to the Agency Operations Committee, and the report included three topics. The first one was our quarterly financial report. The second was our continuous improvement report, and the third one was a compliance monitoring report. Susan Warren from KPMG, the board's external auditing firm, presented the audit of the agency-wide financial statements for fiscal year ended August 31st, 2012. She reported that the auditors were able to issue an unqualified or clean opinion with no findings or adjustments. Staff is to be commended for their work, and we're all very positive about those findings, and congratulations to staff. The committee also received reports from the internal auditor, as well as a report from the lead consultant of the external quality assessment of internal audit. The committee approved fiscal year 14 audit work plan, and no other action there. Agenda item 10B is public testimony relating to the agency operations, and we had no comments received by staff. Item 10C is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board regarding the coordinating board's operating budget for fiscal year 2014. We had a presentation by Dr. Alonso and discussion on the budget. The committee voted to approve the budget. And so to the board, are there any additional questions? Dr. Alonso is here to address any of those at this time. If there are no additional questions, may I have a motion to adopt the committee's recommendation to the board regarding the coordinating board's operating budget for fiscal year 2014?
So moved.
A second. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you very much. Agenda item 10D was approved at the AOC committee meeting yesterday and is on the consent calendar. Item 10E is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board to issue a solicitation for selection of new software solution to replace the board's Helms loan management system with a new loan management system. The committee voted to approve this recommendation, and of course Dr. Alonso is here for any additional questions that the board might have.
Move to approve.
May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Item 10F is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board regarding a request to extend the contract for the Helms student loan software annual usage and support fees for fiscal year 2014 with a total for the year not to exceed $1,250,000. The committee, upon hearing the input, voted to approve this recommendation. Are there any other questions that Dr. Alonso or staff could answer? If not, may I have a motion to adopt the committee's recommendation to the board regarding the request to extend the contract for the Helms student loan software annual usage and support fees for the year 2014 with a total for the year not to exceed $1,250,000.
So moved.
Second. Thank you very much. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you very much. Item 10G is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board to approve a renewal of the interagency contract between the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board and the Office of the Attorney General for the litigation and collection of delinquent student loans for the 2014-2015 biennium. The committee voted to approve this recommendation, and are there any questions that staff, Dr. Alonso, could answer?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That passes. Mr. Chairman, this concludes the Committee on Agency Operations section of the board agenda.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you, sir.
So now we will turn back to item 8, matters relating to the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success, chaired by Janelle Shepard. Janelle?
Yes, thank you. Do we have any public testimony? No, there is no public testimony, so we'll move on to item 8C's consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to a request from the University of Texas at El Paso for a Master of Science degree and a Doctorate of Philosophy degree with a major in biomedical engineering. And I believe Dr. Silverman will lead this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The request from the University of Texas at El Paso is to offer both the master's and the PhD in biomedical engineering. The proposed program would admit 15 master's students and 5 doctoral students in year 1 and increase to 64 master's students and 25 doctoral students in year 5. The institution plans to hire 1 assistant professor and 1 full professor within the first 5 years of the program. The institution anticipates 22% of the cost of the proposed programs would be supported through formula funding. And 9 Texas public higher education institutions currently offer graduate programs in biomedical engineering. 3 are anticipating increases in enrollments in the coming years. However, this is the 3rd fastest growing profession in the U.S., and the Texas Workforce Commission data suggests that current productivity levels may not keep pace with market demands. The program received a positive site visit from national experts, including folks from University of Florida, Clemson, and Johns Hopkins University. We do have representatives from the institution available if there are questions. We have Junius Gonzalez, Provost, Richard Shopester, Dean of the College of Engineering, and Tom Ballin, Program Director.
Move to approve.
Second.
Very good. Is there any discussion? I will say Dr. Tesher and I very much fully support this. We see the shortage firsthand. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Motion passes. Thank you. Items 8D and 8E are on the consent calendar. Item 8F is an update on the new medical and graduate medical education programs to be awarded in fiscal year 2014 and fiscal year 2015 due to House Bill 102550 in the 83rd Texas Legislature. Stacy.
Thank you. The information included in your blue pages and in your packet in front of you provides an overview of the 6 new programs that were created by the Texas Legislature. Funding of $16.5 million was also provided to support the various programs, which include planning grants, funding for unfilled residency positions at existing residency programs, grants to support program expansion efforts and new programs, and support for innovative funding of residency programs, and support for medical schools to encourage primary care innovation. I would like to say on July 11th, we held a conference call and asked for stakeholder input of the proposed emergency rules, which you all will be considering in a little while, for 3 of the programs. I wanted to actually thank everyone who participated in that conference call, and we appreciated their feedback, heard it, and were able to incorporate it for your consideration today. The first of the programs that will be up and running as quickly as possible will be the Planning Grant Program. The Coordinating Board, in conjunction with the Texas Medical Association and the Texas Hospital Association, will also host a stakeholder meeting on August 28th to encourage interested entities to help in the development of this new program. This program provides particular challenges to us because it is for entities that do not currently offer graduate medical education, and it is difficult to know who those entities might be. We're also trying to encourage the development of partnerships between local communities and hospitals that don't currently offer residency training. The second program that will be up and running this fall is the Unfilled Residency Position Grants. These grants will provide $65,000 to support residency positions for programs that don't have all their residency positions filled. So they have capacity, but they perhaps don't have a financial way to pay for an additional resident. We will be asking for your consideration next of a release of RFA. So that's coming. But that concludes my informational report.
There's no approval needed on this, right? All right.
I did
Questions?
have a question about the 4th program where we are not, that's grants for additional years of residency, so logically we wouldn't make those grants until the fiscal year beginning September 1st, 2016, but were there appropriations set aside for this, or is this just the intent?
Actually, there were not for the program number 4. That program is going to be relying on funding provided by the next legislature. It cannot be created until the next biennium. So
HB 2550 sets up the structure but relies on future legislative appropriations to support it. All right. That's what I thought.
Other discussion? All right. Moving on to 8G. This is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the board relating to issuance of a request for applications and the release of funds for the planning grants and unfilled position grants for GME. Stacy.
Thank you. This agenda item will allow staff to post a request for applications and release funding to the 2 programs. Input for both the programs will continue to be sought from institutions, and again, we will be having a meeting on August 28th to get more input. We encourage everyone to provide us with as much input as possible. We want these programs to be up and running as quickly as possible, but running as they were intended to be.
Yes.
Move to approve.
Mm-hmm.
Second.
Any discussion?
I did have one item that's pertinent to this, not relative to the vote, but we had several months ago, of course, we did both a GME and a UME reports, and part of what came out of that was the need to more granularly sort of project the number of residency slots and UME slots that we need over time as the medical schools expand or new ones are built. Have we made progress on doing that so that, you know, literally we and our institutions are all on the same page of saying, you know, in 2018 we're going to need X number of residencies that aren't there today, and in 2020 it's going to be here, so on and so forth?
We will make we'll take continuing looks at that along the way. Part of what helps us with that is our data collection of both the enrollments from the medical schools as well as the what we call the CBMOOR, which is the enrollment of residents. And those data come into us in the fall. So we will definitely be looking at that, updating those on a regular basis so that we know and can anticipate where growth is occurring and predict where we actually continue to need more residency positions, and understand what the medical schools that are going to be coming online will be doing as well.
It's obviously it's not just the statewide numbers we need to add, but where, you know, geographically within Texas they're going to be located.
And isn't it supposed to be at 110%?
That's the goal.
Absolutely. We'd love to achieve that.
I guess we need a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda items 8H, I, J, and K were on the consent calendar. Item L is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the Board relating to expending funds which may be awarded to the Coordinating Board under the 2013-14 College Access Challenge Grant. Judy Laredo.
Good morning.
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 As you know, over the past 4 years, we have been applying for the College Access Challenge Grant. It is funds that are awarded to the state, and we have been deemed designated as the agency by the governor's office over the last 4 years to implement this grant. The grant had to be submitted to Washington by July the 5th of this year. We won't know about this grant. I really wish I could give you a timeline, but in order to even be considered, we also had to submit a waiver because our maintenance of effort did not meet the requirement. But that will be up for review and consideration by the federal office. But if it is approved, in order to even be given the grant, we had to submit the grant. So what we have before you today is the actual grant of what is contained within that document. We have continued to focus on the work that we have over the past year, and it's listed, delineated, our work around Advise Texas. Those are the advisors that are placed in the schools. We have 120. We're accelerating to 125 this year. Our work around student success, the projects that we have funded where we are looking at targets on campuses where you have a high dropout rate, especially among the core courses. And so we are proposing our continuation work with that. Of course, Gentex, you know, has really moved forward across the state with our work being focused now with the P16 councils. We no longer have a contract with the contractor who helped us develop the Gentex program. program. Our work on minority male initiatives, as you know, and Susan Brown mentioned earlier, the number of males, both African American and Latinos, is certainly lagging. And so we have identified some projects, and specifically one with the work around Dr. Victor Sines at the University of Texas that is showing some promise. And of course, as part of the grant, we have to do evaluation. So we are bringing this before you today to ask you to approve this grant should it be funded. If it is not funded, then money cannot be expended. So you're approving the right to move forward if we receive our waiver and they approve the grant, and I certainly will come back and report back to you should that take place. We are all hoping and keeping our fingers crossed. We have done good work over the last 4 years. There's no question. We've never had any exception or comment made by the federal government on our work. So in good faith, we're bringing this before you and asking for your approval should it be funded. Not funded, we will not be able to expend this money.
When do you normally get that back?
Well, we usually know by August the 14th because August the 14th because that would be the first day of funding. But unfortunately, when you're submitting a waiver, it may be the fall, and so we may, if it is approved, we may be working very feverishly to move forth with this grant if that approval is granted. Dr. Alonso's office, along with the commissioner, will probably be those involved in that negotiation because it doesn't come directly out of my office in terms of that waiver. So,
Madam Chairman.
Yes.
Dr. Laredo, can you tell us more about this maintenance of effort waiver? What is?
I told Dr.
Mean?
Alonso I was afraid that question would come up, and so I'm going to defer to him. It has to do with our contribution in terms of the money put into higher education, and every year you're supposed to show an advancement, especially with your financial aid, and you know that in the last session, not this one we just had, we took a hit, so that affected us meeting that standard, and he can explain more about it.
What she said. The requirements for the state receiving these federal funds are broken down into two areas of maintenance of effort. Number one is the state has to, on a 5-year rolling average, contribute or make available scholarships, financial aid for students attending public education. That has not been a problem. We've been able to meet that. But the second part of that is that they also have to make for the year that we're applying the same level or more of the 5-year rolling average for financial aid to students attending the independent colleges or the private schools. As Dr. Laredo has explained, last biennium the state took a significant cut in TEG, which is the scholarships that are made available for students attending those private schools. That dropped that average to below the required amount. So that puts us out, and it's both. It's not one or the other. You have to meet both. So because we don't meet that part of the MOE, the maintenance of effort requirement, under the law, we're not entitled to receive the money. But there is a provision, as has been explained, to submit a request for that waiver. We worked with the governor's office. It went in May. I believe it was due in May also. And so I'm in contact with the Department of Education. In fact, I talked to them yesterday. And so we will continue providing them information, and hopefully they will grant that waiver and award the funds.
Have you gotten any feedback as to how much they weigh the results we've achieved in past years in considering the waiver?
How much?
Do we have a sense of how big a consideration the results we've achieved is toward granting the waiver?
I don't think that, I don't know, Fred, but I don't think that goes into consideration. I think because the instructions that we receive, that everybody receive in submitting waivers, talks about the amount of money made available in those two areas, and then opportunities for them to consider good faith effort. In other words, first of all, were there circumstances that cause us to fall below that maintenance of effort. Second of all, what is the state doing to, and we're hoping, because there is an increase for the coming biennium, as I explained yesterday during my budget presentation, there is an increase for TEG. So we certainly have pointed it out that we think that the state is making a good faith effort to restore those funds. It doesn't get us back above the 5-year rolling average, but hopefully they will see that as an effort in the right direction.
Other questions?
Does this grant fully fund these programs that you've just outlined, or is this just a portion of that?
No, there's also a match that we have to provide, but it does. This is a lot of money when you look at $11 million.
Those are some awfully effective programs.
They are. They've proven to be effective, and that's why we are continuing with them. This would be our last year that we would have these funds available.
Okay.
But it's kind of sad for us because we've seen some good work, especially with the Advise Texas work we've done.
Yeah.
And so it's our last effort, and let's see what happens.
Okay. Thank you.
John Wyatt from our External Relations unit and I are going to Washington next week. We have an appointment with Undersecretary of Education Martha Cantor, and this is one of the issues we'll be talking about.
And this is why there was some effort, or at least some effort, to initiate consideration of state legislative appropriations. Didn't happen this past session. Hopefully, though, because of greater familiarity with the programs this is supported, the legislature will consider in the next session the possibility of replacing some of these federal dollars. And in addition, the College for All Texans Foundation is doubling down, so to speak, on its effort to raise private dollars, hopefully both from foundations in the form of grants, but also private corporate dollars, because I think some of our state's larger businesses would have a direct interest, and the associations that they support a direct interest in the results of these programs.
So, do I hear a motion?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion passes. Thank you. So item 8M, N, O, P, Q, R are on the consent calendar. Items S, 1 through 4, which are proposed rule changes on the consent calendar. Moving on. Item 8T, 1 through 12. These are emergency rules resulting from the 83rd Texas legislative session. So the full title of each of these items is in caption in the written agenda. In the interest of time, I will use an abbreviated version for the 12 sets of emergency rules. So members, do you have any objections to that? Seeing none. Additionally, some of these items have supplemental materials which show additional revisions that we will consider today. These supplemental materials are being provided to you now. So we'll begin with 8T, number 1, consideration of adopting on an emergency basis the Commissioner's recommendation to the Board relating to amendments to Chapter 1, Subchapter E, Sections 1.110 and 1.111 of Board Rules concerning student complaint procedures. Dr. Silverman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. These emergency rules would add a definition of career schools and colleges to our existing rules, and would also allow students enrolled in these colleges and career schools to go through the same process of filing a student complaint with the coordinating board. And it would allow, it would be the agency's responsibility to make appropriate referrals to an accrediting agency or to the Office of Attorney General to address any student complaints received from a student or a prospective student of these schools. And before you guys go on, well, I just want to mention that emergency rules are only required, they're only going to be out there for 120 days. And additionally, every effort will be made. We'll have the rules posted, and we'll take public comment from everyone related to all all these 12 sets of proposed rules. So I did want to say that before we got into this piece, but got away from me.
Yes, these emergency rules are a stopgap, and so that we meet our statutory requirements, but at the same time, they are available for public comment and scrutiny, and we will work with institutions to get the final version right.
Absolutely.
So then the board will receive the final recommendations.
Depending on the public comments and the consultation with institutions, will likely modify the rules and bring them back.
Very good.
And you all will see the full set of all 12 of these rules again at the October board meeting.
So this is just to make us comply with current legislation that's been passed.
It's a short-term fix.
Are there any questions on item 1?
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion passes. Thank you. Item 2 is consideration of adopting an emergency basis, the Commissioner's recommendation. You have the supplemental materials in front of you. We'll let Stacy explain it.
These emergency rules are prompted by the passage of House Bill 5 and Senate Bill 31 and provide the following revisions. The board's authority was changed to Education Code 28.009B. The rules, as you note, they have supplemental materials as well. And on page 4 of the rules, this is TEA? We actually are proposing to make a change so that one of our specific institutions that has an early child or early college high school, but it's not specifically called that in statute, will be allowed to offer more than 3 dual credit, 3 college courses. So we have made an exception on page 4. We've added the specific language, except to the extent approved by the Commissioner of Texas Education Agency. And we did confer with him this morning, and they are comfortable with that language.
Mm-hmm. Stacy, can you give a little bit of background on what the legislature was trying to do with this? Restrict, make it harder for schools?
I don't know that they were trying to restrict or make it harder. I think they were actually trying to provide some clarity and some parameters around what is going on in our high schools related to dual credit. The provision does not apply to students enrolled in approved early college high schools, so that is explicitly named in the legislation as well. Additionally, the emergency rules amend the dual credit funding and specify that the college may only claim funding for students getting college credit in core curriculum, career and technical education, and foreign language dual credit courses. And also it adds that that provision does not apply to students enrolled in approved early college high schools as well.
Questions?
So, just to be clear, the modification highlighted in yellow is principally because there is an early college high school program that is not called an early college high school program, and so because of the specific use of the term in the legislation.
That is correct.
Okay. Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, a second. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say no. Motion passes. Thank you. Item 8T3 is consideration of adopting an emergency basis the Commissioner's recommendation to the Board relating to amendments in Chapter 4, Subchapter L, Section 4.211, and the repeal of Section 4.213 of Board Rules concerning financial literacy training offered by the general academic institutions. Stacy.
Thank you. These emergency rules add the following topics to be covered by institutions in their financial literacy training, which includes taxes, insurance, and financing of health care. It also removes the requirement that institutions provide a certification to the coordinating board of what they are doing. So,
Does it allow remedial financial literacy training for 20-something kids?
Questions? Motion?
Move to approve.
We have a motion and a second.
Dennis?
Yes. Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion passes. Thank you. 8T4 is consideration of adopting on an emergency basis the Commissioner's recommendation to the Board relating to amendments Chapter 4, Subchapter R, Sections 4.286, 4.287, 4.290, the repeal of Sections 4.291, 4.292, 4.293, and new Section 4.291 of Board Rules. This concerns the review of low-producing degree programs. You have supplemental materials for this.
Thank you. These emergency rules amend the procedures related to the low-producing degree programs and removes the procedures that are no longer required. The process for requesting a temporary exemption and an appeal process are no longer required and have been removed, as has been the section related to small class size. Section 4.290 has been revised to provide detail on future recommendations related to non-exempt low-producing degree programs. Coordinating board staff will provide recommendations to institutions' governing boards for programs that have been on the low-producing list for 3 or more consecutive years. If the governing board or institution where a governing board does not exist does not accept the recommendation to close a program, the university system or the institution must identify the programs recommended for closure on the next legislative appropriations request submitted by the system or the institution. Additionally, as previously mentioned by Chair Shepard, we are also proposing an additional revision, which is the repeal of Section 4.92. Institutional officials suggested that we remove the 10-year waiting period, feeling that it was too onerous, and we concurred and felt like that was something we could remove. As many of you know or may have been handed out, we did receive some correspondence from the UT system. This was one of their suggestions, and we did send out a letter. The Commissioner yesterday sent out an email to all the institutions letting them know what we were going to be changing. I believe we had copies of letters provided to you at your own.
Yes, I conferred with Chairman Heldenfels. I'm recommending to the board that we take a legislative intent into consideration and that we remove ourselves immediately from dealing with low-producing programs. We consulted with several members of the legislature as well as staffers. I talked to Chairman Branch. We've spoken to the staffer for Chairman Seliger. I had a conversation with Representative Clardy yesterday and talked to Representative Howard, Representative Patrick, and they made it very clear that they wanted the coordinating board to transfer authority for consolidating or eliminating low-producing programs to boards of regents as quickly as possible. And I propose that we do that effective immediately.
Questions?
Move to approve.
We have a motion and a second. Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion passes.
And actually, I have a little more legal disclaimer to go forward with that as well. I've been advised by our legal counsel to actually ask or inform you, as you know, pursuant to Section 32F of Senate Bill 215, the board may not order the consolidation or elimination of any degree or certificate program offered by an institution of higher education, but may, based on the board's review under subsections D and E, recommend such action to an institution's governing board. If an institution's governing board does not accept recommendations to consolidate or eliminate a degree or certificate program, the university system, or where a system does not exist, the institution must identify the programs recommended on the recommended for consolidation or elimination on the next legislative appropriations request submitted by the system or institution. And before we move to the next section, we would like directions to allow the board staff to return the files on all programs closed by the coordinating board but that are not in the process of being phased out but that are being in the process of being phased out to be returned to the governing boards for their review and their decision. We will forward all files, an estimated 80 or so, related to the reviews of these programs. These programs were recommended for closure through the board's denial of institutional requests for temporary exemptions, and will ask that the governing boards comply with Section 32F of Senate Bill 215 and also notify us with their decisions regarding these programs.
Do you need official board action on that?
Yes.
So moved.
Okay. We have a motion?
Second.
Second. Any discussion or questions?
I have a question. Stacy, will those files include up-to-date, since some of these actions were 2 years ago, do they include up-to-date numbers of students?
Yes, we'll send all our data set to the institutions for their specific set of institutions. But yes, we have all the information up through. Many of these programs are slated for phase out in the coming years because they had students that were being taught out. So that information will also go forward.
And then secondly, those programs that were given 2- and 4-year exemptions, which no longer is pertinent, but those programs had submitted plans on increasing enrollment. Will we also have progress data on those that we can now return to the respective boards of regents?
We certainly can. We just assume that we would continue those on the exemption list so that they're not showing up on the low producing list at this point. So
they will continue on their program of increasing production through the 2- or 4-year term, and at that point we will send the data.
Absolutely, until that exemption expires, then we would forward on that information to the governing boards if that program is not producing any longer. Hopefully those exemptions will allow time for those institutions to get the students completed and through and get what they need to get done.
Thanks for the clarification.
And so I apologize, but so we're still going to be making recommendations to the governing boards as to low producing or not?
Yeah,
they have the authority. I get that.
They have the authority, and we're providing the data and a recommendation based on what the data say, and then it's their responsibility.
All right. So we will still be involved by collecting, providing the data, and making a recommendation. But it is then up to them to take action on or not.
We'll have to have a further discussion about whether we will make a recommendation. It might be more appropriate for us to simply indicate what our criteria were for low-producing programs and why such programs were subject to closure, consolidation, and why we would have taken a particular kind of action if that authority were still in our hands.
In a way, it's similar to facilities. We set the statewide standards for facilities and inform the boards of regents what those standards are, and then it's their responsibility to make a decision, versus what those statewide performance standards are. The same thing really applies to the definition of low producing versus non-low producing.
Well, and at what point will we decide, as far as moving forward, that we will or will not make recommendations? I understand completely. We'll be providing the guidelines, providing the data. Will this board collectively make that decision, or what's going to be the direction?
Yes, we'll certainly bring this to the board's attention. I think we want to confer with the institutions about how they would like this information to be transmitted to them. So we want to do it in the spirit of cooperating effectively with the institutions and the governing boards.
The statute does require, Madam Chairman, that information be statutorily the authority for that be shifted over to the Board of Regents, correct? They're correct. Right. Okay, and that does not necessarily mean the administrations of the institutions. That's the Board of Regents.
Board of Regents.
Okay, so we need to make sure. We need
it doesn't just go by mail to the president of the college.
We need to make sure that it goes to to the Board of Regents, because that's what the statutes say. Correct. Okay, and not necessarily filtered through chancellors or presidents. Okay, because the statute doesn't state that. Okay, thank you.
Other questions or discussion? We have a motion on the floor. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion passes. Thank you. Item 8T5, consideration of adopting on emergency basis the Commissioner's recommendation to the Board relating to amendments to Chapter 5, Subchapter B, Sections 5.21 through 5.25 of Board Rules concerning the role and mission statements, tables of programs, and course inventories. Stacy.
Thank you. These emergency rules revise the section related to mission statements and tables of programs. The Coordinating Board will no longer approve institutions' mission statements. Institutions and/or the governing boards will be providing the Coordinating Board with their current mission statements, as we will continue to post those mission statements on our website. Additionally, the Board asked for and the Legislature agreed to remove the preliminary authority process. The supplemental materials that you all have also reflect these changes. So what we're trying to do with this approach is to remove all references to preliminary authority and change that to preliminary notification. So essentially the information that we'll be seeking from the governing boards related to what the institutions are proposing to plan to do is information such as what the program name might be, what the zip code might be, and when the institution is planning on beginning to plan for the program. And
any
there
questions or
are a lot
discussion?
of changes in there, but mostly it's just to get rid of that rather cumbersome preliminary authority approach.
You have a motion? Have a second? Other questions or discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion passes. Item 8T6, consideration of adopting an emergency basis the Commissioner's recommendation relating to amendments to Chapter 5, Subchapter C, Sections 5.42 through all of that, concerning the approval procedures and criteria for programs. You have supplemental materials for this also.
Additionally, the information that's included in your book shows the rules that were actually approved already. The revisions are shown in red. That really was an anticipatory approach because we knew things were coming down the road, specifically removing administrative changes and that kind of thing. So the sections in blue are what we're acting on today, what you all are acting on today. Additionally, we had a comment related, again, to the UT system, provided us with some input, and we wanted to clarify, so the language in front of you in the supplemental materials clarifies Section 5.44, which basically states that institutions shall request new bachelor's and master's programs using the appropriate degree program request form. So we have a certification form that is used primarily as the one that is reviewed for the majority of the programs. However, a couple of programs offered at the bachelor's and master's level don't come under that certification process. Those include new engineering degree programs and programs that cost more than $2 million. Those we would like the institutions to submit a full request form to us when they're going through that process. That's a little more rigorous review at our end, although I do understand that the institutions and the governing boards go through very rigorous processes to evaluate and create a new degree program. Additionally, it removes F related to low-producing programs, so we wanted to make sure we struck that language as well.
Questions? We have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion and a second. Discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Thank you. Motion passes. Item 8T7, consideration of adopting on an emergency basis the recommendation from the Commissioner regarding awards of planning grants for graduate medical education.
Also, the new planning grants are these rules cover the new planning grants. We wanted to go through and we actually sought input from the institutions. We made a couple of changes related to what a sponsoring entity means. We added an and and an or kind of input from them, and also just provided some additional clarification and added a hospital, what we define as a hospital in the state of Texas as well. These planning grants, again, are going to go to entities that don't have an existing residency program at this time, but hopefully we will get one. Get some more of them very quickly.
So, Stacy, the hospitals that might have just a minimal program, if they want to expand, they don't have to go through this process?
That's correct. They can go through that other process that's coming down the road. That will be in place really for fiscal year 15.
Okay.
So we've got first the planning grants going in, and those are $150,000 for entities to really begin to plan for, you know, whether or not, and explore whether or not they can have a residency program. It's a very costly endeavor. Then the unfilled positions are for those existing programs that are just not at capacity. And then we'll have the new and expansion grants. So we hope to have those in place, well, fiscal year 15.
Any other discussion? Motion?
Move to approve.
Have a motion?
Second.
Have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion passes. 8T8, consideration of adopting on an emergency basis the Commissioner's recommendation for concerning the award of unfilled positions grants for graduate medical education.
Thank you. And again, these are just rules to implement the new program, the unfilled residency position program.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion passes. Thank you. 8T9, consideration of adopting on an emergency basis the Commissioner's recommendation for rules concerning awards under grants for new and expanded programs for graduate medical education. Stacy.
Yes, these rules would actually go into effect immediately as well and would create that new program that we hope to have up and running in fiscal year 15, which would provide funding for expansion efforts and for brand new residency programs that admit first-year residents, those coming directly from medical school and entering residency training.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Motion passes. Thank you. 8T10, consideration of adopting on an emergency basis the Commissioner's recommendation on rules concerning the degree granting colleges and universities other than Texas public institutions.
Thank you. This actually is a result of legislation that was passed, and it actually states that the coordinating board may not issue a certificate of authority to foreign professional medical schools, and it defines a degree, a professional degree, as one that is Doctor of Medicine, Doctor of Osteopathy, Doctor of Dental Surgery, Veterinary Medicine, Juris Doctor, or a Bachelor of Law.
Questions? Discussion?
Move to approve.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Motion passes. Thank you. And 8T12, consideration of adopting on an emergency basis Commissioner's recommendation to the Board regarding rules for concerning bacterial meningitis and the requirement for entering students under the age of 22.
Thank you. These emergency rules will go into effect on October 1 and reduce the age requirement for entering students from 30 to 22 for students entering our higher education institutions. Additionally, the legislation also, the rules including the age requirement begin with the students entering institutions in January 2014. So it does not apply to students entering this fall. The legislation also requires that students must use the Department of State Health Services conscientious objector form if they wish to not have the immunization. Additionally, these rules are amended to allow Texas public junior colleges to have students submit a conscientious objector form using a secure online system developed and implemented by the Department of State Health Services. The online system will be developed and implemented by the Department of State Health Services. In talking with the chief academic officers yesterday, I was reminded to encourage institutions to work within their communities and encourage students to get this immunization or a booster while they're still in high school, which may reduce their costs.
For clarification, I misnamed the item. This is item T12.
Did I skip one?
So I skipped 11.
Apologize, I skipped one.
I skipped 11.
That's
I'll go back
mine.
to it.
I'm so sorry about that.
We had it. We had it. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes.
So T12
okay.
is what we're discussing now.
I apologize. I've gotten a little ahead of myself there.
Any questions?
How many cases of this are there a year?
Oh, and I actually have a Donna. I'm going to ask my staff, Donna Carlin, to come up here and tell you, because we collect that information. We have all sorts of information about bacterial meningitis.
Nationally, the numbers are very small. They range from like 1 to 5 throughout the United States. So very small numbers.
And what is our compliance? Is it, I mean, do we really have 100% of the students actually get it?
Well, unfortunately, the legislation does not have any kind of monitoring attached to it. So the requirement is out there that this be done, but we don't, follow up or collect data in regard to the compliance, but assume that there's 100% compliance.
The schools don't have the ability to have a waiver, right?
No, they don't. The students do.
Oh. They can voluntarily, but they
object.
have to sign a liability. Okay, yeah.
They can they can submit a conscientious objection form to the institution that they're attending.
Okay.
Let me see. You said there's 1 to 5 cases annually, nationally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the numbers are very small.
It's a very expensive vaccine, too.
Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions, discussion? You have a motion?
So moved. Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion passes. Weekly passes. All right, back to item T11. Pardon me. This consideration of adoption on emergency basis, a recommendation to the board regarding rules concerning eligibility of Prairie View A&M University to participate in the Research Development Fund and the handling of expenditures from pass-through awards. Stacy.
Thank you. This set of emergency rules adds Prairie View A&M University to the Research Development Fund beginning with fiscal year 2017 with the condition that the available funding would be greater than than it was for participating institutions in fiscal years 14 and 15, which was $73 million. So it just adds Prairie View into the mix. They were explicitly prohibited previously from participating.
Questions? Discussion?
Move to approve.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say no. Motion passes. We are moving now to agenda item 8U. Report on the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Improvement Act funds to colleges for basic and leadership grants. This is for information only.
Thank you. The information included in your packets provides the list by institutions of basic grant allocations for program year 2013 and 14. The total allocation is estimated at $23.1 million. The amount of funding is a little lower this year because of federal funding cuts due to sequestration, and the allocation to Texas was decreased by 8.73% from 2012-2013. Basic grants provide support for career and technical programs at Texas public, community, and technical colleges. The funding provides much-needed resources to the colleges to support their academic and career and technical skills of students participating in career and technical education programs. And the next section also refers to the leadership grants, which provide funding for the advancement of career and technical education in Texas. Leadership grants have a statewide focus and provide colleges with professional development and innovative approaches to career and technical education. Funding levels for each of the leadership grants are provided for you in the blue pages, and the total is $885,000 to support about 9 projects, I believe, this year for 2013 and 14.
So, Stacy, the basic grant totals $23 million plus, and that's
Yes.
all federal.
Yes, it is.
Questions?
A couple. So the 23.2 million represents, that is the number after the 8.7% federal cut.
Well, that is, but we had a little extra money left over from last time, so we pushed it forward. So funding is provided to the institutions on a reimbursement basis. So at the end of the fiscal year, if funding is left over, it will be reallocated usually in January, so that it's not exactly that 8%, 8.7%.
So there is some carryover funding in here.
Yes, there is.
And then the leadership grants, it states in here that the allocation is for $1.9 million for the biennium, but the list here is for, basically less than half that.
That's what we originally thought we would allocate to the program, but we received, originally we had received intent for 19 proposals, but we received actual proposals for 14, and we are funding 9. So.
Okay. So
again,
are we fully allocating the available funds?
Absolutely. Again, that funding can then go back and be reallocated to the institutions.
If there are no more questions, we can move on to agenda item 8V, a report on proposals approved by the commissioner or assistant commissioner since the previous board meeting. This is for information only.
Thank you. This is the table that shows, again, the new associate, bachelor's, and master's approvals that have been made since the last meeting. Additionally, if you flip to the second page, it shows you something new this time around. This reflects the notification to us by the institutions for preliminary authority. So we have already gone ahead and allowed those institutions that submitted their preliminary authority requests to move forward at a rather quick return. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
If there are none, thank you, Stacy. We appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you.
Last-minute changes. And Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Concludes my business.
Thank you, Janelle, for guiding us through that lengthy set of rule changes. We will now go back to agenda item 7, which is lunch, over here in the Tejas room, subsequent to which we will reconvene in here to adjourn. I'm sure everyone in the audience wants to hang around for that. So we'll move to agenda item 7. That concludes item 7 on the coordinating board's agenda, and that brings us to our last item, if I can find its number. Item 12. It concludes our meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Have a motion and a second from Bobby and Janelle. All in favor, say aye. All opposed can stay here as long as they want to, and I will use my new gavel.
And that was the new gavel, wasn't it?